Good morning and welcome to the August 4th, 2021 Executive Committee meeting. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Treaty 4 territory, a treaty signed with 35 First Nations across southern Saskatchewan, parts of Alberta, and Manitoba, and the original lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. To ensure social distancing measures are being met during this time, some members of City Administration are attending the meeting today through video conferencing. I'd like to remind those who are attending through video conferencing of the following. Please ensure that your video camera and microphone are turned off. If a member of council wishes to speak, use the raised hand function to be placed into a speaking queue, and when speaking, remember to unmute your microphone and enable your video camera, and all votes will be conducted with a recorded vote. Okay, I guess to start with, we'll need the approval of the agenda. Can I get someone to move the agenda? Councillor Bresciani. Any opposed? So moved. Can I have someone move the minutes? Councillor Hawkins. Any errors or omissions? No opposed. We move forward. First up, we have a delegation to answer questions on the EX 21-52, the Dudney East Garden Leased Expansion. I'd like to call upon Delegate David Cornelius, Dudney East Community Association Board. Please introduce yourself for the record. The organization you are representing. I understand you'll only be here for questions today. Is that correct? Am I off?
Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Hi, my name is David Cornelius. I'm with the Dudney East Community Association, and yes, I will be here for questions on our community garden expansion.
Thank you. Can I have someone move the report? Oh, is there any questions for the delegate? Councillor Stadnichuk. Oh. Nope, I see no questions for the delegate. I guess we'll move forward. Thanks for attending, and I guess I'll get you to leave. Kind of a weird
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Now I'll get someone to move the report. Thank you. Councillor Stadnichuk. And do we have any words for the report? Anything to comment, anything to mention?
Well, I fully support it, and I think that it's a great initiative, so that's all I have to say.
Thanks. I'll get administration maybe to explain the report.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Lacey.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So the community, the Dudney East Community Association has operated a community garden on city property for approximately 20 years. They've seen significant increased demand for usage of that community garden, and as a result, they're asking for an expansion to introduce new ground plots where they're currently located. And because that's an addition to a land lease without public offering, bylaw requires us to come to council to seek that approval. And so the report is before you today seeking that approval.
Thank you. I see I have Councillor Ferndura with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's more of a comment than a question. Dudney East Community Association have been asking to expand on another plot of land further east, because there is quite a few residents that were interested in getting a plot. There was not enough room in this one to add a few more people. So I'm glad to see that the community has come forward and adding to the same plot, east side and the west side. And I know this part of the gardens is run by volunteers, so it's good to see that they're still continuing to being engaged and adding a few things to the community. A lot of gardening going out there, a lot of backyard gardening going on, so it's good for the community. You drive by there and see it's busy, so I'm totally in support of this. Thank you.
Thanks for the comments. No other comments. I guess I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Or I guess that's...
Thank you. I'll begin with Councillor Stadnichuk, please. Councillor Hawkins.
In favor.
Councillor Stevens.
In favor.
Councillor Bresciani.
In favor.
Councillor Findura,
In favor.
Councillor LeBlanc,
In favor.
Councillor Shaw,
In favor.
Councillor Zahidniak,
In favor.
Mayor Masters,
In favor.
Councillor Moll is away, Councillor Mancinelli.
In favor.
Carries 10 to 0.
No, I'm here.
I'm sorry, Councillor, we thought you weren't on the line. How do you vote?
I'm on the line. In favor.
I apologize for that. Carries 11 to 0, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. We will now consider item EX21-53, Johnson Choyama Graduate School.
I'd have to excuse myself. I have a conflict here. I'm a professor in the school.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. We will now consider item EX21-53, Johnson Choyama Graduate School of Public Policy, Executive Internship Program. Can I ask someone from administration to introduce the report? Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The report in front of you talks about extending our long-term relationship with the School of Public Policy. So we've had an ongoing relationship since 2010, and we've entered into 5-year agreements. For subsequently, the agreement was due this end of this term in terms of April 2021, and here we're seeking approval to extend that. It will provide 2 internship opportunities on an annual basis to give opportunities for policy students to experience municipal government and bring their expertise to our team, as well as provide opportunities for mentorship with directors and executive directors as they go through their learning from their master's program.
Thank you for that. Can I have a mover for the report? Councillor Findura. Are there any questions in regards to the report? Councillor Findura.
To Mr. Chair, when we bring out the students to do their kind of internship or experience, I know other places, other students do not get paid. They actually pay to do the work. So this is the same? They come in on experience and they're not paid. They just get the experience on how the city works or the government. Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the agreement with the university stipulates that we pay an honorarium to the university of $25,000 a year to cover the cost of one student participating. They are here full-time for 8 months, and then the university does manage a stipend to the student accordingly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see no other questions, so I guess I'll call the vote.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll begin with Councillor Findura, please.
In favor.
Councillor LeBlanc,
In favor.
Councillor Shaw,
In favor.
Councillor Zahidniak,
In favor.
Councillor Moll,
In favor.
Councillor Stadnicek,
In favor.
Councillor Stevens,
In favor.
Councillor Bresciani,
In favor.
Mayor Masters,
In favor.
Councillor Mancinelli.
In favor.
Carries 10 to 0, Deputy Mayor.
We will now consider item EX21-50.
Waiting for Bob.
Oh, yeah, we need Councillor Hawkins. Just trying to get it done. We will now consider item EX21-54, the 2020 Annual Reserve Report. Can I ask someone from administration to introduce the report? Mr. Lacey.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So administration is required annually to bring a reserve report to council under the Regina Administration Bylaw. And this report provides an overview of reserve balances as of December 31st, 2020, and provides projected balances of each reserve through to 2025. Reserves are funds authorized by City Council to be set aside for future capital and operating needs. They are a key component of the City of Regina's long-term financial strategy and support the city's priority of achieving long-term financial viability. Reserves continue to provide a mechanism to support the future maintenance of assets and new infrastructure and sustainability of city services. The city continues to follow industry best practice and municipal benchmarks and the stewardship of reserve funds. At the end of 2020, the city had 21 reserves with a total balance of approximately $199 million compared to $173 million in the previous year in 2019. That increase of $26 million was largely due to external COVID-19 funding that will be used in 2021 as approved in the 2021 budget to offset continued COVID-19 financial impacts on the city's financials. In the projected forecast, reserves are anticipated to decrease by $16 million to $183 million at the end of 2021 due to council-approved initiatives in the 2021 budget. In conclusion, the 2020 reserve report contains detailed information on each reserve, including whether individual reserves are within their targeted range. And there is one recommendation in the report, and that recommendation is to instruct the city solicitor to amend the Regina Administration bylaw to create a new capital reserve called Mamawayitan Reserve, the purpose of which is to support the maintenance of that center. In 2014, Council did authorize the creation of this reserve, and from a financial accounting perspective, we have basically been having a reserve in our financial statements that's reflective of that direction by Council in 2014. However, in reviewing the bylaw this year, I consider this to be a housekeeping amendment. We did note that in the actual bylaw, we've not legally established that reserve which Council authorized in 2014 and which we've been treating as such in our financial statements. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions members of the committee might have.
Councillor LeBlanc.
Thank you. I appreciate the report. On my read of it, we would take the money for the reserve from the current operating budget of the centre. And my question is just, have we spoken to the centre of what impact it would have to have 1.5% less in operating per year and that put into a reserve?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So thank you for the question. Actually, how it works is when we establish the budget, we've established a certain amount in that operating budget to be transferred to the reserve every year. So this is not a new funding requirement that we're adding on to the operating or taking away from the operating expenses that we have been budgeting for the center for the last 4 years. This is just a reflection of actual practice, which is already occurring, and those funds have been in previous budgets, and from a financial perspective, have been set aside through the previous years.
Okay, great. So it's not as though the centre has incorrectly received 1.5% more in their hands owing to the lack. Like, they won't see less money in their hands if we make this change.
No. Once again, thank you for the question. So that center's run through a tripartite agreement with 2 other partners. So throughout the past years, we have been covering our share of the operating costs and maintenance costs of that center. These funds are basically being set aside, and so they remain within the city to basically fund our share of future maintenance needs of that center to ensure if there's any capital upgrades that need to be done as that center ages, that we have the funding there to ensure that we're funding our share as a partner in that center in any future capital upgrades.
Great, thank you, appreciate it.
Councillor Stevens.
Do you need a mover for this?
Yes, we could use a mover. Would you like to move it?
Sure.
Okay, so move.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a follow-up with that question. So it's a joint use facility. Do the other partners, such as the library, the police, and others, do they have their own standing reserve and the same responsibility to maintain their own capital assets, given it's one big facility?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of whether or not they are or not establishing like reserves. So I would I don't think we have that question answered with us here today, what the other parties are doing with respect to their future obligations.
All right, thank you. Question about, I think it's page 32, the Winter Road Maintenance Reserve. Through the chair, we have $169,000 in excess of the $2 million limit. I guess my question is, I would say on any given year, there seems to be an unmet demand for winter snow services, whether it's a service we don't offer like sidewalks, intersections or roads that people believe should have higher standards. This is the reserve that just seems like we shouldn't have a reserve. We should be spending all of that money, given that there is a need. We also have areas such as bays and crescents where some residents are essentially paying for their own private snow removal. Not to mention there's a snow angel program, so this seems like it could be a fitting source of revenue. So perhaps you could explore this a bit further and explain why do we have a reserve, and wouldn't it be better just to spend that money given residents are asking for this service?
Yeah. Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So I think that's a great question, and I think for new committee members, perhaps here on committee, typically when we brought this reserve report forward in past years, that reserve is usually been in a surplus position of $1 million, $1 million plus. And that's just simply because of how we calculated the budget for winter road maintenance exceeded what the actual expenditures were pursuant to the winter road maintenance policy in any given year. This year it's substantially smaller. A couple of comments. This reserve is really intended to ensure that should we have a winter where there's a lot more major storms than what we have budgeted for, and we budget that over, I think, a 5-year average, that we have funds here as a city to be able to actually clear the roads. The city operates on a balanced budget, so our budget revenues equal expenses, and so we don't have that reserve and we have some unexpected significant snow events, we would potentially struggle with respect to having the funds available to clear the roads. The second piece I would say is that because we have seen over the past number of years, this year being an exception, usually a substantial surplus. You might recall in the 2021 budget, we went back and looked at how much we were budgeting annually for winter road maintenance. And as a result, we in part reduced that winter road maintenance policy. But the second thing that we did through that budget was to enhance the level of winter road maintenance services to be provided. So I think in answer to your question, I would say that fund is here to ensure that we have the funds necessary if there's large snow events. But secondly, to your point about ensuring level of service and then looking at enhancing level of service. In fact, we did that through the 2021 budget, increasing winter road maintenance service within actually a lower budget than what we had typically budgeted in the past.
Thank you. A follow-up question through the chair. Specifically, so we have a snow angel program which is there for residents who are physically unable to clear their sidewalks, managed in part through community associations. Would it be appropriate, and maybe legal is the better word, to actually draw from this reserve to increase or maintain that fund, which I believe is currently at $50,000, in the event that there's a higher need amongst residents?
Through you, Mr. Chair, so typically we use reserves for one-off events where something happens that we didn't anticipate in the budget piece, and allows us to ensure that we have the funds to be able to address that matter. I think if there was a desire to do something in the Snow Angel program to provide more funding or to provide increased flexibility to that program, I would, I guess, advise committee members that that might be something that should be brought forward as part of the budget and put in as part of the annual budget piece. Having said that, if there was ever a specific issue that needed to be addressed, once again, that was one-off, ultimately, council always has the ability to make decisions around the reserves the city has, and so that opportunity always exists.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, page 39, the solid waste reserve. We've seen a pretty substantial buildup of this reserve. It makes sense. I'm kind of curious as to how landfill closure and decommissioning fits into this. I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. I believe it's $12 million is estimated for closure. which is still a small amount compared to the $61 million that the reserve might accumulate over the next few years. Is that $12 million an entire landfill decommissioning or a partial closure, other investments? Maybe just clarify that liability, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps I'll ask Mr. Onright if he has information he could share specifically on that.
Through the chair, if you remember a few years ago, I believe that closure amount was hovering around 30 million. That was adjusted. I'm going to ask Sean Reeson if we can get him to chime in. He's on the call. Sean is the manager of business support for our division and has done a fair bit of work around that reserve, and he may be able to answer that. If not, I can follow up on the question. Sean, are you there?
Closure liability has fluctuated. That the last time, sorry, getting an echo there, that
Excuse me, Sean?
was hovering around.
Sean, could you start over? We lost you mid-explanation.
Okay, I was getting a bit of a feedback there, so I'll concur with Mr. Onright that the cap and closure liability is usually hovered around that $25 to $30 million mark, and the dollars in the reserve are set aside for that portion. As well, I'll add in that I know they're doing some solid waste modeling that will likely increase the capital spend over the next 25 years. So what you see in the capital plan today might not be reflective over the long haul.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Kim wants to follow up.
Go ahead, Mr. Onright.
Through the chair, there is financial modeling currently being done on a long-term financial plan for the solid waste side of the business, and regarding solid waste, there's a report coming back to committee and council on a funding model, which definitely can impact this reserve over the long term. So that's coming, I believe, Q1 of 2022.
Okay, thank you. As a follow-up through the chair, in terms of the modeling, if we go ahead with the curbside composting and additional services, will that affect the reserve and the rules around it? Is that being projected in the modeling? So are we anticipating a change in service delivery and programs?
Through the chair, so the financial model is going to include recycling, organics, and solid waste collection.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Bresciani.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Just in regards to the Mama Wheaton Centre, and I had a similar question, knowing I would like to know what the other partners are paying. If that can come back in a undertaking or a memo, I think that's very important that we are 3 partners in there. The point that I want to know is, how did we come up with the $98,000 per year, through the chair?
thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So in 2014, I believe the amount to be put away in reserve was determined to be a percentage of what the cost was of the facility, or our share of that cost. And so 1.5% of that cost equals the amount that we're putting away every year. So that's not uncommon when budgeting for future maintenance expenses as the infrastructure ages and needs to be replaced or updated or renewed, that you set away a certain percentage of the overall capital cost that was originally incurred to build that facility. So in this particular case, 1.5%, and I'm just looking for it here, but I believe 1.5% was the amount to be determined to put away every year to ensure sufficient, yes, 1.5% of the capital cost to build the center is being put away every year to ensure those funds are available in the future to ensure that that life of that facility is met.
Thank you. So would that be the same then for the other two partners in that assessment? Is it owned a third, and a third, or how is that? How does that work through the chair?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have that information with me, and whether or not that was part of the partnership terms, or whether each individual entity is determining separately how they plan to fund future maintenance of that facility. What I can tell you here is that we're setting aside $98,000 a year into a reserve to help maintain that facility into the future. But we can follow up as part of the undertaking with respect to that question.
Thank you very much. So in regards to the, on page 11, the land development reserve, the $12.2 million that's still out of there, it looks like it says that there is approximately $12.6 million funding available related to this reserve still in that fund now after everything else. Is that accurate? Because I know that we had heard, when we just heard from the towns, one of the main concerns was we wanted to take out a park because for profitability. I want to make sure that, is that accurate, that we still have $12.6 million in the reserve?
So this is the, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, I just missed the first part. This is the land development reserve?
That is, yeah.
Yes. So the land development, reserve, as noted here, is in a negative balance. What the report is indicating is that as capital budgets are approved, that money is pulled, when the approval happens, the money is pulled out of the land development reserve. And what's being noted here is that there is capital carry forward, if I could refer to it as such, of the amount referred to. I think it's $26 million. And so what that's indicating, when you take the reserve balance in addition to the amount that's sitting in capital carry forward, overall the funds related to land development are in a positive position. So what we're trying to reflect here was the reserve balance plus capital funding that is yet to be spent on land development that has been pulled out but not spent yet.
Through the chair, and do we know when that would be spent, or?
So these funds will be spent over the next year or two, particularly as the town's development continues to occur. Part of the funding pulled as well relates to the yards and the city's 1/3 share of the federal funding related to the yards development. And so those funds will be spent over the course of that federal funding being spent related to the yards, as well as over the next year or two as the towns continues to be developed and land made available for sale to builders, I mean.
The last question I have is, we have a reserve almost for everything that we do within the city. The only one that we don't have is for park, the equipment for parks, so for sprinklers, for undergrounds within our, why do we not have a reserve? Because I know every year when we have to go to budget, there's a small amount that's put aside. Why do we not have any maintenance or any kind of a reserve for our parks maintenance, through the chair?
So through you, Mr. Chair, so we have a number of activities that we undertake relating to infrastructure. And in our capital plan, we address those through capital programs, where those programs are funded on an annual basis. So parks as an example, and irrigation capital work, infrastructure work is planned every year. That's included in the capital budget, which council approves. And so the intent there is to match what the planned expenditures are for the year in that capital plan with the capital budget. We do have another reserve, which is a general fund reserve. So that reserve, what that is the reserve that is the broadest and provides the most flexibility to council. So I would say that if there was an unplanned expenditure that needed to be made in something like irrigation or in the parks piece, that we would look to accessing that general that general fund reserve to be able to address any unexpected needs that weren't captured in the capital plan that council approves annually.
Through the chair, I guess the concern that I have, and I struggle with the fact that we have major concerns within some of the parks, and the undergrounds are with sprinklers. We don't even continue them anymore. We've shut them down. So again, when we don't have the money there and we get to the budget, we get to the budget, but guess what? At the budget time, it's like cutthroat because everybody needs this. There's no extra money. So if we don't put money aside in a reserve, it seems like just a Band-Aid situation every year. You can go to the general fund. I agree with Councillor Stevens. That winter maintenance has been a slush fund for the general fund every year. We just transfer that money. It used to be 6 million. Now I think it's, the 2 or the 3 million in there. Residents want to see things change, but our reserves don't really speak to that unless it's in the book to be done. The point is winter maintenance, if we get a year, we've got some snow, that's great. But at the end of the year, when we've also got people saying the sidewalks are still unplowed, the parks are still full of weeds, we don't move and take it out of reserves. Has to be a budget item. That's my point. That's where I'm a bit concerned. Every year we come with an excess reserve. That's what reserves are for. And I struggle when parks and maintenance is a big portion of our budget. It's not big. It's actually not very big for how many parks we have. But I do think that we need to consider looking at parks and rec, park maintenance for sprinklers and undergrounds as for a reserve. So a city manager wants to speak through the chair.
So through you, Mr. Chair, just some general comments. Council is within their right to ask the questions about, reserves, capital investment. The reality is, and, we've been talking about it for years across the country, there's a huge infrastructure deficit. So back in the day when money was flowing from all orders of government in the 70s and 80s, we built parks, we put grass everywhere, we put irrigation systems everywhere. And, urban design is different. We try to, incorporate naturalized areas, and that's all done so that operating budgets can be more manageable. So every year, yes, we have discussions around the level of investment that is required, for example, irrigation. The amount of catch-up that we need to do to bring all the irrigation systems back to, a modernized state, we just don't have the funding. So even if we look to draw from our general fund reserve, we would have to make such a significant investment, and then we'd be challenged to have the operating dollars through our capital program to continue to invest. So, it is a bit of a balancing act. When we talk about a winter road maintenance reserve, that reserve has fluctuated as weather patterns have changed. You'll all remember Election Day this past year. Saskatoon had a major snow event, and it cost them over $9 million to clean up that one event. So although we have a winter road maintenance reserve, we monitor that reserve, and when we feel that, the weather predictions and everything else are at a state where we can transfer some of that money, then we move it into one of the other reserves. As Mr. Lacey's indicated, the general fund reserve gives us the biggest opportunity for flexibility. So if we want to prioritize an investment, and we all know that parks and open space through the pandemic there's an increased expectation. People have spent more time outside, more time in their neighborhoods, more time walking in the community, and there is an expectation that the city increase its level of service. It's also, we're in drought conditions. And if you're a farmer, you'll say you haven't seen this type of weather and this type of dry and drought since 1988. So in one breath, people have an expectation of lush green parks. On the other side, we're in a bit of a drought. So we're trying to manage that as best we can. But the reality is we're challenged in terms of having the financial capacity to be able to make the investments, whether it's irrigation, whether it's some of the other major capital that we need to invest in. So I think we are going to continue to struggle, administration and council, to tell that story to the citizens of Regina. But at the end of the day, we're going to struggle to be all things to all people. But definitely we need to look for those opportunities where we can have an impact and improve quality of life for the people that live here.
I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Beshiani. Next up, Councillor Zginiak.
Thank you. So my question is about the general fund reserve. So I understand it's projected to be below its minimum at the end of this year, and that we don't really have any forecast of how we might replenish that reserve. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit about the impacts or the implications of that.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So the general fund reserve, the reason we don't really have any projected outwards replenishment of the reserve is the general fund reserve is replenished when we have any surpluses in our annual budget. So because we budget to have break-even budgets, we've assumed that we'll hit break-even every year. So the general fund reserve, I guess I'm answering the second part of your question first. The opportunity to replenish that really is if we see any surpluses occur in future years in our overall general operations, or secondly, whether council made a specific decision that they wanted to put funds aside as part of the annual budget to be going right into the general fund reserve. So I guess that would be the second part of your question. To the first part about long-term sustainability, so council has established guidelines of mins and max in the reserve balance. And those mins and max aren't hard and fast rules that if you go below it, that you right away have to find a way to bring it in. What they're meant for is kind of flags. It's a yellow flag. That this is something we just need to keep an eye on, we need to be aware of, and perhaps monitor more closely going forward to see where that balance is going, and if necessary, to take corrective action. What administration is flagging here is that just because of some of the commitments against the general fund reserve, we do believe it's going to be coming down to its minimum benchmark that we've set. So it is a little bit of a flag that this is something that we need to monitor. And so to your point, Councillor, I would say, as administration, we'd say that there is still flexibility there because we're right around the minimum, but it's something that we need to watch going forward. And as we make decisions, perhaps in the future, to draw from that reserve, we should be cognizant of the fact that we're around that minimum already and be thoughtful about future decisions. Maybe more so than maybe otherwise we would be when we look at opportunities.
Okay, thank you. As a follow-up, so you mentioned, and it also mentioned in the appendix, that there would be because there's no dedicated source to replenish that reserve, there is the opportunity to consider a dedicated funding source if needed in the future. So that's the sort of thing that administration would be keeping an eye on and coming to council with that recommendation if we're finding that we're not able to replenish that reserve and it continues to go below the projected minimum. Is that accurate?
No, thank you. So thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, that is accurate. And the expectation here is that when a reserve goes below the flag, below the guideline or above it, the expectation is as part of this report we come back and provide council with our advice about what we should do. And so our advice around this one really is that let's just monitor it and take no specific action at this point in time. If at a certain point in time we believe action should be taken, or council believed action should be taken, council could direct us to go back and come forward with some type of corrective action plan. We don't believe at the current time that that's necessary.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate administration drawing to council's attention that the reserves are a kind of insurance policy that are there for one-off unexpected events. I'd like to ask a question about another function of reserves. The city enjoys a very healthy credit rating. That credit rating helps us keep any tax increases low. Are reserves an important part of that, maintaining that healthy credit rating?
Through you, Mr. Chair, reserves are certainly something that the credit rating agencies look at, as well as a number of other things like debt. And so certainly the state of our reserves, and in our view, we're in a good position with respect to our reserves, do contribute to our AAA credit rating, which is the highest credit rating that's provided by Standard Moores.
Thank you.
Poor's.
Thanks, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Stanchuk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some questions just to try to understand the Regina Revitalization Initiative Stadium Reserve. So the explanation is that it provides the funding for the capital and operating expenditures for the stadium. Can you kind of explain this? Because I know that there's a 30-year model, financing model for the stadium. But are we paying for the borrowing costs, the debt? Because last meeting we had a report on our debt, and it shows that the stadium is about 2/3 of all of our city's debt. So I'm trying to understand how we fund it and why we have a reserve. So if you could explain that, please.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So when the stadium was built, it was built with the intent, with a 30-year financial model, which the councillors referred to. And the intent is that over those 30 years, that the financing of the stadium and the operation and maintenance of it would be at least a net zero, if not in a positive balance. And so this reserve is really a way in which to track how we're doing against that 30-year model. It was always the expectation that there would be ebbs and flows, and so in some years the reserve or the model might go into a negative, and in other years it might go into a positive. With the goal and intent that at the end of those 30 years, at a minimum, it would be in a zero position. And so that model includes the cost of paying off the debt, other costs of operating the stadium, as well as revenue sources then to offset those costs. And the revenue sources, the largest revenue source is the property tax base. Council might be aware that there's a 0.45% increase in the mill rate every year for the last 10 years. That is really used to build up the revenue source to basically help make that model net neutral over 30 years. And so in the beginning phase, we did expect that model to dip into zero territory or negative territory because we were building up that revenue source through the property tax base. The other sources include things like the seat levy, the $12 seat levy on large events held at the stadium, including rider games, as well as some rent and other ancillary type of revenue that's generated from the stadium. The one note I would have here is obviously COVID has had an impact on attendance. And so it has, when we go back and look at the model, it's something that we as administration are monitoring very closely. And we've been in discussions with our, initial partners in the stadium project, the partners and the riders, with respect to the impact of COVID. And so that is something that we're continuing to monitor. It has had, obviously, an impact last year with no CFL games played at the stadium. It has impacted at least 1 year of seat levy revenues. And so it has had an impact on the model in a negative manner. That's something that we continue to work through and model and have discussions with our partners as we see what happens this year and what we see happens in the next couple of years. And similar to the councillor's previous question, if at some point we believe that that model's not sustainable, at some point we'd have to come back here to council and have a conversation about that and determine what a plan of action might be to bring that model back into balance. I would say right now we're continuing to analyze what that impact is from the past year, but also going forward and having discussions with our partners around this piece. And I anticipate at a certain point in time we'll likely be back before this committee with a further conversation about this reserve.
Through the chair, so the reserve is just an extra buffer for helping to finance some of the costs. I'm just trying to understand why.
So the reserve really, it does serve as a buffer, but it also serves as basically the indicator of how we're doing against our original objective of balancing the reserve. I do expect, and you can see it's projected to go down here over the next 5 years. I do expect, for example, at some time we'll be in a positive position, maybe in the next 10 years. And then as the stadium ages and there's capital infrastructure work that needs to be done there, we might make expenses. You'd see that reserve maybe drop down, 15 years from now, and then build it back up as we continue to collect revenue and move forward. So that's why I say it'll be a little bit like a wave that will fluctuate over time. But it is there, you're right, to basically fund future capital investments with the goal of it being net zero at the end of 30 years.
Okay, now I understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I see no other questions for administration. I guess I'll now call on the clerk to call the vote.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll begin with Councillor Stevens, please. In favor. Councillor Stadnichuk.
In favor.
Councillor Hawkins.
In favor.
Councillor Bresciani.
In favor.
Councillor Findura.
In favor.
Councillor Zahidniak.
In favor.
Councillor Shaw.
In favor.
Councillor LeBlanc.
In favor.
I will check with Councillor Moll. I do believe he's left the meeting now. Mayor Masters.
In favor.
Councillor Mancinelli.
In favor.
Carries 10-0, Deputy Mayor.
Okay, next up, we'll be having a presentation from a delegation from Riel. It'll be concerning report number EX 21-55, 56, and 57. After the presentation's finished, we will be dealing with each of those in a separate entity for questions for the delegation. Oh, and also I need to hear from Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will recuse myself as I was the former chair of the Exhibition Association. The matters before you actually I participated in while still chair. They have been a long time in the making, so I'll recuse myself for the balance of these submissions.
Thank you. If I could invite Wayne Morski, Tim Reed, Roberta Engel, Sinead Tierney, and Jerry Fisher. Please come forward. Present on behalf of Regina Exhibition Association Limited. Because we're dealing with multiple reports, the 5-minute limit won't be in effect. Please feel free to start when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, and thank you to the City of Regina Council and Administration for your support in allowing the Exhibition Association to present today. I must also add, it is nice to see all of you in person finally. My name is Wayne Morski, and I have the privilege of acting as a chair of the board of the Regina Exhibition Association. REAL has been a part of our community since 1884. As a volunteer-led not-for-profit organization, we have been malleable, flexible, and adaptive to the needs of our community. And I would argue the events of the global pandemic have once again highlighted the needs and the benefit of having a large, multi-purpose site staffed by many professionals and well-trained team members and led with entrepreneurial and innovative people. In our traditional business, we always celebrate that we are the heart of our most vibrant experiences and your most cherished memories. COVID-19 once again reminded me as board chair that even when our stadiums are not filled, our arenas are dark, and our convention business can't happen, when our community needs us the most, our team will respond. We have supported the delivery of tens of thousands of COVID-19 tests, hundreds of thousands of COVID-19 vaccinations. We have done trick-or-treats, we've done drive-in concerts, we've done Iceville, we've done the WHL Hub. We have found a way to keep soccer, hockey, figure skating, and ringette to happen. And through the duress of times in our community, I certainly feel the role of REAL has made every more clear within our organization and externally. My hope is that you, as our owner, feel the same as what we share today is about the future, our relationship, and our collective growth and sustainability. On behalf of our Board of Directors, I am pleased to have the opportunity to share a progress update with you today, while concurrently I wish to recognize the fine work that has been done collaboratively between our two teams to align the future-facing agreement that will support the strategic achievements of our Real 2.0 plan and the advancement of numerous city strategic priorities. We have come a long way in my short tenure with the Board of Directors, and I must acknowledge the support and cooperation we have received from your team. From Chris Holden to Jeff May, from Barry Lacey to Diana Harlick, our collective teams have delivered what I believe are outstanding results. I'd like to thank your administration for their wonderful partnership. I'd also like to mention that the material within this document has been shared with our Board of Directors and was unanimously endorsed for approval. It is my hope that you, as our sole owner and shareholder, will echo these positive sentiments following our presentation today. So in the interest of time, I'd like to give a brief introduction of our delegation today. We have Mr. Tim Reed, our President and CEO, Ms. Roberta Engel, our Vice President of Corporate Services, Mr. Jerry Fisher, Vice President of Commercial Development, and Ms. Sinead Turney, our Corporate Governance Officer. With that, and respectful of time, I will hand it over to our President and CEO, Mr. Tim Reed. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Council, thanks for the opportunity today. We'll try to move as quickly as we can, but recognizing there's lots of material. We're going to swap some people in just so that we manage the distancing requirements in the chairs. But want to talk about why we're here today. So today we're here to wrap up a number of conversations that you as Council will be having, but really to support your administration in sharing our perspective on those documents. We're here today to talk about a new agreement between ourselves and you as our owner. We're here today to give you a snapshot business update on where we are as an organization. As we heard in the previous conversation, this hasn't been a good year in the large public gathering business, and we're not necessarily certain on what the years to come will look like. Here to talk about our site plan, financial impact of that plan, and give you an update on commercial development on our site, because I'm sure some of you that have been there have seen some growth and some progress. And then, as always, we're here to answer any questions you might have. First focus that we want to talk today is about amending and extending our current agreement that is in place with you. Historically, and I think this is importantly, since 1884, the Exhibition Association has come together. It was originally an agriculture society. Like many of them in Western Canada, it was relatively disorganized in structure, but passionate in volunteerism. We came together every year to deliver a fair, find a way to trade livestock, find a way to share goods. In 1907, we became an organization, and that organization was intact as the Regina Agricultural and Industrial Exhibition Association since 1907. In 2012, we had an amendment, and in 2014, we changed once again, where you, as the City of Regina, assumed the assets, assumed the grounds, assumed the responsibility for the site, and essentially became our sole shareholder and owner. What's interesting about this is really this organization has been part of our community for as long as the city has existed, and longer than our province has existed. That's not unique to Regina, but I will echo it's important as we talk about the future. In April of 2015, we extended a 4-year agreement, which was the relationship that we shared between ourselves and you as our owner. That relationship has changed over time as we've changed our strategic focus. And based on strong recommendation from your administration and legal team, the decision was essentially to advance in a 1-year lease scenario or a provisional lease that would extend. That's where we have sat in the past, and essentially we have to come up with a strategy on what this looks like. Our push as an organization was to find an opportunity for a long-term lease. And I want to share the driver behind that was really driven by you. Now, that being said, many faces around this table were quite different, but in my first month, we had the opportunity to present to you as council, and you said, how do we find a way that we don't have to give you any money? And for those of you that were on council, I'm sure it was more eloquent than that, but it essentially was a message of you need to be self-sustainable. And that was the direction of council. And that was what our board took from that conversation. We then went to the public with Evraz Place 2.0, engaged over 6,000 people in terms of what should Evraz Place be in the future. They gave us clear direction. Our board of directors, in consultation with our stakeholders, proposed a plan called Real 2.0, which we presented to you in 2020, which was endorsed by our board of directors and yourself and shared publicly. Since that time, we've been trying to make that go. Now, the reality of it is it's never a great time to launch your new vision in the heart of a global pandemic. But that being said, I do think it reaffirmed how important that plan was. Because as we saw major funding lines, such as large public gatherings, major concerts, CFL football, strip themselves down, it highlighted the vulnerability that exists in our historical business plan. We can't rely on a couple big events to make ourselves sustainable, or we will be in front of you often and endlessly and ask for money. And so what we did during 2021 and 2020 is I think we reaffirmed the fact that this plan has to happen, it has to go forward, or frankly, we will not find a sustainable way of managing your assets and delivering your services. So where are we today? Today in front of you, we've put together, in consultation and collaboration with your administration, an agreement that I think is very strong for both partners. It's important to recognize that our sole shareholder and sole owner, you can step in at any time. Tomorrow, if you want to become the board of directors, you have that right. And tomorrow, if you want to provide direction, you have that right as well. What we're looking for is an opportunity for a long-term lease. And the reason that this is important is because it provides long-term direction for potential investment. So we're seeking a 40-year lease with 2 possible 20-year extensions. We're seeking the right to sublease so that we don't have to come back to you every single time we have a lease agreement with a sublease. And we're seeking the right to be clear in the fact that we want to commercialize some components of our campus. Why is this important? Well, it's important for a few reasons. I don't think we should have organizations that are delivering $50 or $60 million worth of annual operating on a year-to-year lease. It's just a bad scenario to be in. The reality is, as we start to advance our commercial development and our long-term tenant strategy, they are looking for consistency. Nobody wants to look for a 20, a 30, or 40-year lease, whether that's a recreational partner or a commercial partner, with an agency that only has a 2-year window on their rights to that land and operations. Probably the most important driver behind this is the fact that what we are doing right now is land leasing. And so we provide a lease on a long-term availability that gets returned to you as the city at the end. From a financing standpoint, it's different than when you sell the land because there is an asset and there's equity in the value of that land. The asset that that leaseholder is getting is actually the rights to that land for a prolonged period of time, which they then borrow against. And so from a financing standpoint, our developers need enough term with the rights to that land so they can finance against it. And so that's why we propose long-term leases. Traditionally, that term maths out at 50 years or at 40 years. Many of them would argue for a larger investment, they need longer term. So what does this do for us? I think what it does is it allows us to advance the mandates that we've shared with you. At the end of the term from a commercial venture, there's 3 options that happen. So when McDonald's opens is a good example. At the end of this, there's really 3 options that can occur in any lease scenario. At the end of it, we assume those assets and they become the property of the City of Regina. At the end of it, the leaseholder has to return those assets to original condition and transition the land back to the City of Regina. Or the lease can be extended and negotiated based on agreement by both parties. Worst case scenario, you end up with a McDonald's. Best case scenario, you end up with the original form. And perhaps even better than both is you end up with another 40-year lease that pays commercial value. But that's why it is so important that we find an opportunity to go forward. Obviously, there's a financial side to this, and I'm going to hand this over to Roberta Engel just to talk about where we are today and where we're going.
Thank you, Tim. The numbers are always the fun part of the story, and so it really does link back to what Tim mentioned. And so prior to 2015, you'll see that our annual revenue was around $29 million a year. With the opening of the Mosaic Stadium and International Trade Center, although it did have a positive impact on our revenue by 52%, simply due to the increased operating costs that it takes to run that stadium as well as the ITC Center, you know, expenses did outpace the revenue increase by 54%. Flip it, please. So what does that do to our bottom line? So as you can see that since 2015, our EBITDA has been dramatically impacted simply because of the additional ITC and Mosaic Stadium, and it did create that opportunity for us to come to you with the 2.0 plan. And so the 2.0 plan will ultimately help us remain sustainable and continue our commitment to the city to maintain all of our assets. So where are we today? We all know that 2020 has had a negative impact on most businesses in our city and throughout the world. You know, and Real is no different. With the inability to deliver on those events and those rider games, you know, sporadically the sports and recreation, operationally we did lose $5.7 million. However, Due to the fact that Real applied and was successful in obtaining CEWS funding, our operational loss was reduced by 4.1 million to 1.6 million at the end of the year. So even though with the lifting of the public health order, we are very hopeful that we'll continue to see financial results improve for 2021. We have a budget of $2.1 million, and as of the end of June, we're forecasting a loss of 1.5 million. So what does that do to our cash flow impact? You know, we often talk about EBITDA being, reflective of how our cash is impacted. When we were here in December of 2020, we asked council for an additional $8 million financing multi-draw term loan. And, happy to say that our financial results and the fact that CEWS was successfully granted to us, we've been able to not have to actually access that $8 million right now. So we've been able to mitigate our risk, manage our cash flows properly. That being said, we feel it's a little too early at this point in time to determine whether or not we're going to need access to that $8 million or what level we're going to need access to that $8 million. However, we are committed. And so you can see at the beginning of December 2020, we had a forecasted cash flow loss of 4.2 million. With the ebbs and flows of CEWS funding and some of the losses that we're going to report due to just our overall budget performance, we're projecting still that we're going to hit a $7.4 million cash flow deficit by 2022.
So I think it's important to recognize that, what's the story through COVID-19 in 2020, and this is, I think, a very valuable point for us to reiterate, is we were able to access CEWS funding and government grant programs because we are unique and separate to you as the city. And so it does afford us opportunities to apply differently than you may be able to as a city. So from an operational standpoint, 2020 cost us $5.7 million. But because of our ability to access grant programs and subsidy programs that were available through the pandemic, our actual end-of-year EBITDA position was 1.6. In a different scenario or operating situation, that would have been offset or paid for by you as the City of Regina. And so I don't want to minimize the value and structure around the relationship that we have, because it does afford us opportunity. In 2021, we've seen some positive shift. We're outperforming our original budget pace, and given the opening of events this summer and the opportunity that we see in this fall, we anticipate that we'll see positive performance. That being said, what I will say in our industry are we are seeing signs of risk, which is why we believe that maintaining that credit availability is important, as well as being sensitive to projections. We are seeing U.S. touring artists starting to slow, even though Live Nation yesterday announced one of their best quarters. We're seeing people concerned with indoor venues, and we're seeing sensitivity in routing. With the Delta variant progressing in the United States, I think our industry should be cautious but optimistic. And so in 2021, we're holding a line of a $1.5 million deficit. That does include substantial opportunity this summer with events as well as CEWS funding. And if we continue to see success and positive return to business, I think we can likely outperform that number as well. We won't touch that credit facility unless we need it, but I don't know that we're not in a position that we won't have to turn an element of our business on that has a significant cash draw that we may need it. In terms of the major risks that we see on the horizon, I think as we return to this fall, it's important to realize that much of our business depend on youth who remain unvaccinated at these times. The inability for us to manage the Canada-U.S. border creates great challenges in the movement of goods as well as people, of which most of our top performing artists come out of the U.S. What we're seeing in the Delta variant in the U.S. is creating tour cancellations, tour rerouting, and slowdowns in the entertainment industry. And I do believe we have to keep tabs on the concept of a fourth wave, because it has impacted our business and it will impact it again in the future. So where are we? Well, I want to share our master plans with you because they're a critical component of our plan going forward and our approvals with you. Our board of directors have talked often, and internally we've talked often about where we need to land on the development of a master plan. And I think what becomes really important is to recognize there is really one fundamental tipping point on however you want to play architect and move buildings around on our campus. And that really is what happens to the future of the Brent Center. I can't minimize the fact that a Brent Center remaining on the Real campus or a Brent Center stepping away from the Real campus has a dramatic shift in how you plan and you program the site. The result of the Brandt Center being on campus consumes about 4 acres of usable land. It changes the bottom line performance of an organization like ours to a tune of about $2.1 million. And it shifts 500,000 visitors a year. All of that is enough material change that there is different visions. So today you're going to see 2 proposals, one that we call option 1, which is where the Brandt Center leaves our site and we become heavily recreational in focus, and option number 2, where the Brandt Center would remain on our site. I know that's not a perfect scenario, but it's probably the right approach for where we are today. And I'm going to hand this over to Jerry Fisher, who is our Vice President of Commercial Development, who has led our commercial development, to talk about where we are with it.
Thank you, Tim. I'd like to share those 2 options that Tim just talked about and some more detailed phasing of each of those options. So starting with option 1, which as Tim mentioned is more of a sports and rec focus on site and will be without the Brandt Center, will be moving off site. Phase 1 would begin this year in 2021 with the opening of the McDonald's on the Louvain corridor, as we call it. And completion is set for that project at the end of August. We'll be turning over to a local operator at the end of this month, and we'll be looking forward to a grand opening and a Big Mac early in September.
Or 2.
Or 2. Phase 2 is through 2022. It includes plans to begin design and construction of a number of projects, first of which is the soccer pitch, which is contiguous to the current Affinity-plex, and will hold about a capacity of about 500 people in its first iteration. The YQR distillery, which we will talk about in more detail later on, will be about a 42,000 square foot project in our current Canada Centre building. Hotel, which we are currently in negotiations with an offer to lease with a group that's looking at building a 4-story hotel with approximately 170 rooms. And we're currently also in negotiation for our Parcel C along the Louvain with 2 restaurant groups that are currently interested in the same site. So that would be phase 2 in 2022. Phase 3 would move between 2023 and 2024. We'd continue to expand the soccer facility to include 12,500 square feet of lockers, premium seating, and increase about 1,150 seats. We would also be working on the Exhibition Parkway, which is a circle drive that would encompass the entire lot and extend our driving route more to the south of the property and away from the current Brandt Center and around. 3 additional commercial retail units that we're looking at the south side of the property that would be primarily ideas like restaurants, bars, family concepts, or potential theater. Extension of our storm water pond, which would be reprofiled to be more of an outdoor public gathering space, which would include also construction of a stage and plan to be a gathering space for 1,000 to 3,000 people with a permanent built stage.
Just through the chair, I think it's important to recognize these drawings look somewhat different from what you've seen in the past, where there was a focus on the south side of the property. One of the challenges we ran into is the recognition of the cost of development on the south side. Right now, there is a very major trunk line of utilities that move through the south side of the property, and the cost of moving those are upwards of $5 million. And so at this time, the cost to land value just didn't make sense. So what we've tried to do is add additional footprint, and it's actually less acres than we had originally planned, but still make it usable for our site and respect the fact that the south side of the property is difficult to develop on, is one of the learnings that we found.
Great point, Tim. Thank you. In phase 4, which would be 2024 to 2026, we'd look a little bit internally to our future operations center, need for storage, workshops, welding, etc., that would move to our northeast section of our parking, and admin building space for corporate use, as well as the repurposing of the Brandt Center itself, which would be repurposed into sport, courts, and recreational use. And then moving to, Moving to phase 6 would be focused on, I jumped to phase 5, did I not? I did. Phase 5, which would be the addition of a new parkade. This would be put in place to support our sports and rec, our entertainment, and also a partnership with the Pasqua Hospital in that case. And phase 6 would be addition of demolition of the cattle barns to create more additional surface parking, which would be approximately 280 spots in our northwest area of the property, the addition of 2 new twin arenas, and the potential doming of the soccer facility for current cost just over $1 million to dome the facility. And that would be the end of option 1, phases 1 to 6. Option 2, which would include the idea of the Brandt Center staying on site. Phase 1, exactly the same as the previous, with the McDonald's being phase 1. Phase 2 would be exactly the same with the soccer pitch, distillery, hotel, and restaurant being put in place, so no change there. Again, phase 3 would be exactly the same in option 1 and option 2. However, in phase 4 of option 2, this is where we'd begin to look at the new multi-purpose event facility, or the new Brandt Center, which would be placed in the northeast section of the property on top of where the current Canada Centre building is. There would also be leasable space that would be attached to that facility, like food and beverage or merchandising on the main floors, an additional space like an ITC 2.0 to give us additional space for events, and the parkade would also come at the same time. So it would move ahead 2 years. If we had the addition of the Brandt Center on site, we'd need the parkade to move forward in terms of its timing. And again, the Ops Center and the administration building would continue to move forward in this phase. And then phase 5, which would be 2026 to 2028, again would be the repurposing of the Brandt Center into sports and rec use. However, it does move from phase 4. Previously, it moves backwards 2 years to phase 5 after the Brandt Center or Event Center was built. At that, I will turn it back to Tim.
So I think it's important to recognize that through these shifts, we are updating all our transportation studies that have been done, and we're working with your planning team on that. Although I will say the focus of this plan is now to route traffic around the perimeter. So right now, where you can drive through the site at 184 kilometers an hour, like many people do, we're going to force you to the perimeter so it's a little bit safer for pedestrians and for traffic flow. I do think it's important to recognize that working together with the city, there is an opportunity to make this site fairly interesting, not only for vehicular traffic, but also public transit and bike, walk, and not get run over when you're in the parking lot. And so I do think this is an important opportunity as we build the site. We will have the updated transit plans in place. At the end of the day, nothing changes dramatically or in a material way, other than we certainly focus on how do we move people around the ring of the property. In terms of parking pool, because this is the question that I have no doubt we'll get this afternoon from everybody, essentially the parking holds stay about the same. Now, yes, it does mean you're going to have to walk farther in some cases to get to your facilities, but I think that's a luxury that we have, not necessarily a necessity. Ultimately, there's close entrance to each of the facilities. There'll be accessible entrance where needed, but the parking footprint essentially stays the same. What's important to note about this is we have considered the fact that our retail vendors are going to need separate parking for their facilities, which will stay in place regardless of the event. The orange parking footprints are essentially the space that we need to deliver our ongoing business. And then there is opportunity for staff parking as well as mixed-use parking around the parkade. So in case you do have any questions about that, I also don't want to minimize the fact that we have an agreement with the Armory to use their parking lots as overflow, which is a standing one, which provides us 300 parking stalls, and that you as the City of Regina have about 1,300 stalls adjacent to the Lawson in a gravel fashion that right now is available. So there's lots of parking options, but I do think that as a collective we need to be creative around how we do that, because there's lots of demand for space around Evraz Place and the real campus. We have been working with Kim and his team on just the understanding of transit nodes. One of the limitations that we have right now on our campus is we actually don't have a bus stop on it. So we're a site that generates 3.7 million visitors, and everybody that wants to access a bus stop actually has to walk to the Lawson. Your team has been great on working with our designers on planning this out. But as we talk about a campus that truly is activated, the concept of public access and transit nodes become pretty important, as well as comfort when you're walking out from a sporting event looking to take a bus. I don't think everybody needs to drive a car to a Pats game or a Riders game. It's not what we do in other cities, and we actually need to provide the amenities so that we change how people access our site. One of the components of our site that's really important is how do you gate it and how do you structure it for special events. We've gone through the work plans with our designers as well as some of our key partners on how do you develop areas and zones. One of the things that we've really talked about is how do you create space that is accessible and programmable outside. It's not just the parking lot, it's a programmable space. So we've done a number of work with other cities that have town squares, halls, public gathering places, so that the parking lot can be taken off and can be a place to watch Team Canada play for gold, or it can be a place where you want to showcase the next election or your New Year's Eve celebrations. We've got lots of parking lots. We don't have lots of programmable space. And so a big shift that you will see in this is the shift from it's not a parking lot, it's a plaza that acts as parking and acts as programmable space when we need it. And so you'll see in the design we've tried to incorporate elements of pedestrian circulation. And so how do we move that detention pond so that it becomes programmable space? How do we leverage the fact that yes, we have a train track on the south side, but actually is a fairly pretty part of our property if we turn it into some green space, connected with Confederation Park and connected with amenities. So very similar to what we're showing on the vehicular traffic, pathways, walkability, accessibility was very important to us in how we modeled the pedestrian circulation. This is a piece that I think is really important because this comes back to the discussion about how do we create outdoor event spaces. You'll notice that in every scenario we've tried to incorporate stages. Now we're not talking about grand stages, but fixed infrastructure that have access to power, to water, to lighting, to controls, and to footings. Where Confederation Park you can pull a stage up, where in our central south lot you can pull a stage up, and where there's a stage that's available in the detention pond that only floods once every 25 years, so why can't we use that as a natural amphitheater and make that available to the community? What we like about it is it's not just parking lot, it's actually now space that we can use for community groups. Sure, when we have a Riders game, it's a parking lot. But the other 352 days of a year, maybe it can be a programmable space for the community and something that allows community users to toboggan, to play, to go and recreate. Now obviously this plan has always been mathed on how do we maintain our commitment to our large events. So this is the footprint for the Queen City exhibition in its largest form, and yes, it still fits around everything that we've got. This is the footprint that we need for tie-outs for Canadian Western Agribition, as well as the parking stalls, and yes, it fits around the needs of Canadian Western Agribition, and it also fits around the needs of Farm Show. So we haven't built this out with a model that is, let's walk away from what's been important to us for 136 years. Now, does it make it tighter? Does it make it more of an experience? We believe it does. Does your walk change in certain scenarios? Yes, it will. But we still have the space to do everything that we've talked about. And so what does this mean from a financial standpoint? I think this is important because it changes where we go.
Thank you, Tim. So as Jerry and Tim were drawing out and, visualizing what does our campus look like and what does the property look like in the future, I was lucky enough to rework the numbers and look at our new financial targets as a result of the fact that COVID did have an impact on our ability to generate revenue. So when I go back and look at the 2.0 strategic financial targets as set by the board has asked that we try to achieve a 4% revenue increase as well as a 3% expense increase, or minimize it to 3% year over year. So all these charts show is how our annual EBITDA from now until the end of 2034 has been slightly reduced for a target number in order for us to remain sustainable.
I think that's really important, just to be clear, that if you look at the delta between the orange line and the gray line, that's what shifted because of COVID. And so it has just changed some of our ability to reach our end goal by 2034. It's just pushed it out, not by an equal 1 or 2 years. It has a compounding effect.
Thank you, Tim. So how do we do that? How do we achieve our financial strategic plan? And so, we've got 3 major buckets that can help us do that. We've got our business as usual, and so business as usual is considered to be what we do today, offering our sports and recreation, offering some of those events, and our catering services. And then, of course, there's the new longer-term initiatives, some more annual shows or events that we could have. as well as the long-term commercial and campus development will help us achieve that sustainable EBITDA. So what does that look like on a graph? So if we just take business as usual, apply a modest increase of 2% revenue growth and 1.5% growth for expenses, you can clearly see that the target that is set by the board and what our business as usual will drive for EBITDA, there is a significant gap that needs to be closed. So thinking outside the box, we started to look at what can we do for sports and tourism and major events. And when we're talking major events, we're talking about the NHL, the Garth Brooks, the Briars, the Mem Cups, like how can we turn around and continue to attract those? And so taking a conservative approach, adding an annual average of about $175,000 for sports and entertainment, you can see that although the gap is minimizing, it's still a fairly large gap to cover. And in 2022, I just want to note that we were able to achieve the target just simply because of the fact that we've been able to secure the Grey Cup. And so you can see the financial impact that hosting a Grey Cup really does have on our organization in the city. So with the change in developing from the south portion of the property, it did reduce the number of acres that we were able to produce or to commercially develop. So we've gone from the original target of 38 acres down to 7.5 acres. But you know, it really didn't have that much of an impact overall, you'll see in a later slide, on our ability to become sustainable and achieve the targets as set by the board. And one of the key pieces was the fact that the Agribition building is one that's been, has proven to be a viable and sought after option by YQR, and so therefore it's helping contribute to that lost acreage by utilizing a building that would normally most likely sit empty. So when you add that into our business as usual, add in the sports and rec and major events, and now you add in the commercial and campus development, you can see that we're clearly closing that gap to what the board has set for our target. On average, commercial development will add a $1.5 million to EBITDA to our property, and it'll help achieve those strategic financial targets that have been set. The timeline we've already been through, so I'll maybe go to the next slide.
Yeah, and I think it's important just to recognize that that timeline is consistent with what you're seeing today. It does consider that we're going to receive lease revenues from McDonald's in 2022 when they open, a full year. It does consider that YQR will go forward. We do believe that the lease is essentially finalized with a hotel partner that will be in the ground next spring, and we feel very confident that we will see another acre at least of commercial development relative to restaurant properties. And so the timelines that you see in here that are calculated into the financial modeling, I think are quite realistic based on letters of intent that are in place or leases that are in preparation for signature.
Thank you, Tim. So, you know, Tim mentioned the impact of a new arena, and you know, I thought it was really important for us to highlight, you know, that a new arena could really further contribute to our strategic plan by increasing EBITDA of about $1.6 million. And this information was obtained from the Brand Center 2.0 report that was brought forward. And so you can see the top graph shows where we're earning or where we would project our earnings for the Brand Center. But if we were to turn around and be able to secure that arena on our property, it does add that 1.6. So now you take in business as usual, sport and rec, major events, commercial development, and the new arena, and the bottom left-hand graph shows, shows the impact of how. Can you go back one slide? Sorry, Tim.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry.
So the bottom left-hand graph does clearly show how those three elements of our strategic plan and financial equation does start to achieve, and in some years actually exceed the board target that was set.
I think it's maybe just an important fact to remind council of whether you have a new arena or not, operating an arena is important to the business model of Rio, because those earnings go directly back to operating the facilities and go back into the capital side of the buildings. And so I think one of the takeaways our board has recognized is, regardless of a discussion on a new arena, whether it's on our site or off our site or we never build one, operating an arena is important currently for the business model at Rio because it generates positive cash flow for us. That otherwise the increase of 1.6 that you see or the increase of $1 million today would be lost, and we'd have to come up with that somewhere else.
So the next slide just highlights a couple of strategic plan risks. You know, we do have the grant funding that we're currently getting from the province of $2.6 million. We have included, the original slides did include the fact that this $2.6 million grant fund would be extended straight through to 2034. But if you turn around and remove it, it shows how it really does impact us, and in fact, we start to lose money in 2028 when we turn around and remove that $2.6 million. So it really does highlight the fact that that funding is extremely important from our province. And then to Tim's point, you know, there is the possibility a new arena may be constructed off-site. This graph does bring into the fact as well what happens when that arena is removed from our financial equation.
So what does that mean, I think, from a financial learning standpoint, and I think this is important. Commercial development, we don't have as many acres available as we had hoped. Reality of it is that we understood the underground scenarios. It just became more complex as we had a better understanding of how we build. Now, we have offset that somewhat in the fact with what you'll see today in YQR. One YQR development is worth 7 to 8 acres of land lease development. The redevelopment of the Canada Centre is worth 5 to 6 acres of land development. So as Roberta had suggested, even though we've lost essentially 30 acres of potential development because of utility challenges, our ability to convert our old, aging, and frankly financially unviable facilities into new modern facilities drives a positive EBITDA position that has a 5, 6, 7, 8% or 8 times multiplier on a land lease. And you'll see that today when we go through the math. In terms of commercial development, I think we've been very successful on the repurposing of aged infrastructure, but even through COVID-19, we've seen lots of interest, lots of leasing opportunities come forward, and I would say it's in a positive position. Business operations, we do believe business operations will return, will be more efficient going forward, but we don't think our business fundamentally changes coming out of COVID-19. In fact, we actually think it likely gets better. The discussion on a future arena or what happens with the Brandt Centre, I think I've commented on that. That's not an insignificant one when you model how this all comes together. And we recognize there's many conversations around that. And then lastly, the importance of ourselves and your administration and you at council working together to retain that casino grant cannot be understated, and we should make that a priority collectively. It's $2.6 million, and no matter how many Garth Brooks concert land leases or pizza parties we throw, that's a big number to offset, and so we should look to secure it. In terms of the timeline, we've talked about the timeline that we're following. The modeling that you've seen today is consistent with everything that we've outlined. So if something shifts, we can alter the timeline fairly easily and understand what the financial consequence or opportunity of that might be. We want to talk a little bit about YQR today, and thank you for the opportunity. So I'm going to hand this over to Jerry to talk about the lease potential that's in front of you. I think this lease opportunity highlights why we need a new agreement between ourselves and the city, because otherwise every time we need to secure a lease, we'll be coming back to council and asking for independent approval on each key element. We're looking for a partnership that empowers the city manager and his staff to validate that this developments are in line with the strategy proposed and that we can advance. Reality of it is every day that we wait on not advancing YQR is $10 million of commercial investment that isn't being made at a time where we could use that recovery dollar in our construction sector. So time really is money, and I think the opportunity before us on a new agreement allows us to be more prompt in response. Jerry, over to you.
Great, thanks, Tim. If we could forward to the slide that shows the interior of the building, I'll walk you through the concept. The YQR concept involves separating the building into 5 primary spaces. In the northeast, the distillery and brewery. In the northwest, the duty-free secure storage. In the southwest, the retail liquor store. And in the southeast corner, this culinary school and restaurant, including an outdoor patio. Currently, there's a MOU in place with SAS Polytechnic and YQR for brewing, distilling, and culinary programs, which they're hopeful to start next fall, September of 2022. Also, there's common space in the center, which will be operated by REAL for events and activities. All the lease space around it will be locally owned, and all construction managers are additionally all local companies. The overview of the lease involves some of the key deal points. It's a 40-year agreement with a possible extension of 2 terms at 20 years, It's approximately 42,000 square feet of rentable space at $10 a square foot, which has an escalator of the lesser of consumer price index or 3% annually. It has an annual site fee for, which is really for ingress and egress at the Louvain and 11th entrance. That starts at $7,262, a very specific number, with the same escalator as on the rent. It was based on a percentage of space taken up by that, by YQR as a percentage of cost to remove snow and keep that space. The tenant is responsible for all permitting fees and levies, all operating costs, taxes, and utilities, providing any irrevocable standing letter of credit, and all repairs, maintenance, and management of the internal building, excluding the common space. And we as REAL are responsible for upgrading that common space. We're estimating that at around $1 million in capital, and any necessary repairs to the exterior of the building, including the roof, and providing 30 parking spaces to YQR, which includes the YQR staff parking spaces.
So we've tried to highlight the opportunity that this provides, because I will say that the ownership of YQR has been comfortable with us sharing some of the data in their business plan, and so the data that you see today is facts from their business plan. But I will say I think this highlights a win-win-win. If you look at the Agribition building today, for those of you that have been in it, and many of you probably haven't, it's an old tired barn. It's been around for a long time, it's serviced us well, and it really is housed to a few events when we have major events, but ultimately it's where we park our equipment, and it's where we put our operations team. It's booked 30 to 40 days a year. It houses our maintenance office. It costs us about $250,000 a year to operate it in EBITDA, and essentially it's got $850,000 in deferred revenue associated with it in the next decade. So it's an old tired building, and one that has been on our radar for change. This deal, I think, really combines public and private collaboration as a win-win-win. And the last win in that, I think, is you as a city, because it provides opportunity and revenue for space that has never earned us anything in the past. The impact for REAL is we get $8 to $10 million of capital investment into a building which is owned by you as the city, that ultimately we own long after YQR chooses to go away, or frankly defers $1 million in maintenance costs that we don't have the ability to pay. Generates $675,000 in EBITDA swing on a building that used to lose money to one that has a high margin, high profit scenario. It adds additional food and beverage opportunities. It also speaks to our vision of working and developing skills in the culinary and the hospitality sector, because many of those that work there will actually be students getting certified in their brewery, distilling, or culinary expertise. And it does make our site more attractive. In terms of the City of Regina, it manages a deferred revenue risk that you have on a building. It generates $150,000 estimated in tax every year, and it supports the growth of a local business from a small footprint today to a very large one in the future. From an employment standpoint, it'll create 130 new jobs, about $3.4 million in labor expense, which goes back to people's pockets, and about an average wage of $26,000. Sensitive to the fact that many of those employees are part-time, so that's a pretty good wage when you consider what that looks like. In terms of the math on this, and I think this is really important, and it is an opportunity in the fact that YQR has been kind enough to allow us to share their data set. You know, if the assessment value on this property is $9 million, that's about $150,000 in new tax for you as a city that you never received before. The value of the lease is about $430,000 to us. We have to buy out $50,000 in contracts, and I think that's really important, because the agreement that we achieved with CWA is we will pay you for the space that we're taking away from you, which is why they're supportive of this. And so they're not at a loss. Actually, they get a cash win overnight that's paid for by this development. Even with that outlay of cash, the offset from an EBITDA perspective is about $630,000 of swing on the bottom line of REAL. So this changes the company we are almost overnight. Plus 30 people in the brewery and distillery, 60 people in the restaurant, 40 people on the retail side of the operations. Ultimately, they're going to spend $10 million a year to operate this business. Those are all significant wins. When you math this out over the 40-year plan, you know, this is a $25 million win to the bottom line of REAL, which ultimately is yours. This generates $6 to $7 million worth of new tax cash for you for an aged piece of asset. And overall, it generates somewhere around $140 million worth of new impact for our GDP. So it's not insignificant, even though it's just one little building on a very large campus. And I think it's important as we talk about commercial development just to understand the opportunity that exists. What does it look like? You've seen some of these images before. They update the exterior of the building, and there's some opportunities to go through. Jerry will run through these pretty quick and give you a sense of what it will look and feel like, pending approvals from planning.
Thanks, Tim. As Tim said, we'd like to share some of the design drawings, which allows you to visualize the future of the project. This is the southern exposure of the building with the patio in the southwest corner, and you can see the building attached to the Brandt Center there. The next is the entrance through those same doors with the retail liquor store on the left-hand side and the culinary school restaurant on the right-hand side of that hallway. The next is a rear shot of the culinary school and restaurant, which is open to the common space which we operate in the center of that building. And this is, of course, the retail liquor store, an interior shot of that. The next is shows the center use space that we will operate, set up for a casual gathering in this shot here. And again, set up for casual gathering. You can see a little snippet of audio-visual on the left, so it is our intention to also have a strong audio-visual set up for gatherings that would happen on a regular basis in this space. And the next, you can see it set up as a banquet space. And finally, a view of the distillery in the northwest corner of the building. Allows you to get a good visual of everything.
So where are we today? We're here to support the recommendation from your administration that we advance with this lease around YQR. We're here to highlight the fact that there's a number of other leases that are coming down, which is why our large and overarching agreement becomes so important. But certainly we believe that this is in keeping with the Evraz Place 2.0 strategy, the Real 2.0 strategy, and honestly, the strategy that we've had about enhancing our downtown and the experience at Real. Where are we today from a commercial development? And I think this is a real positive statement for something that was approved in 2020 or quarter one of 2020. Since the approval to advance discussions on leasing, we've confirmed McDonald's. It'll open in a couple weeks here. YQR Distilleries is in front of you. We are at the final signature phases of a hotel lease for 1.5 acres that wants to go on the ground next year, which is a substantial capital investment. We have 3 acres of restaurant potential that is in negotiations today. Reality of it is we've been able to secure with fixed leases 30% of the available lands that are on our campus, and 70% of the available lands on our campus currently have a hold. So there is opportunity for new partners to come forward if they'd like. But I think when you have the ability to sell 70% of the available lands that you have during a COVID year, that's probably a positive statement about the appetite for this development. In addition to that, we've been able to develop an opportunity around a number of indoor spaces that will provide potential in the future. So we're going to ask Jerry to leave, and we're going to ask Wayne to come join us to close, but thank you for gifting us so much of your time.
Thank you, Tim, Roberta, and Jerry for the great job. I recognize that we've shared a lot of information with you as our owner and shareholder today, and again, thank you for affording us the time and engagement. With an overview of our proposed long-term agreement, our site planning updates, the YQR Distillery Partnership, an update on the success we have experienced with commercial development on our site, I'd like to share again that our Board of Directors is extremely pleased and proud of the work of our team. Although COVID-19 was devastating on our industry and our organization, we were fortunate to have had the Real 2.0 strategic plan. Following the unique challenges of this year, our Board of Directors believe more now than ever that the plan is more important than ever. With 73% of the available commercial site at Real under a lease or in active negotiations, I'm excited to see what the construction season next spring might bring in parallel with returning to our traditional operations. The future of Real may very well set a new standard in sport, recreation, and live event experience in Canada. With that, again, thank you once again, and we'd be delighted to answer your questions. And I'll step back and ask Jerry to come forward as they are the ones with the answers. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to go over how we're handling this procedure right now. We're going to open this up for questions in regards to, first of all, the proposed 4-year lease for Riel. We'll have questions from council. From there, we'll move the report, go to administration, move through the report, and then we'll come back to go through the YQR lease in the same manner, and then the third topic as well. So that's how we'll be handling it there. Yeah, individual vote on each and moving between them as we move through. So first up, we have...
This is a ton of information. A ton of information. And I'm not sure that the questions divide up easily into 40-year lease, brand center, YQR. I just don't think we'll be able to ask questions in that way. So my suggestion, Mr. Chair, would just be that you throw this open for questions.
Well, we could do that too, I guess, but we still do have to have the 3 separate votes. They are 3 separate matters. And, you know, I can be really mean and really keep things in order, and I'm just joking. We can try to move
Well,
through.
Mr. Chair, I'm not opposed to 3 separate votes at the end of the day, but this may be a very long day, and I'd like to see a general ability to ask questions.
Yeah. I think Mr. Holden has some comments as well.
So through you, Mr. Chair, and just in support of what Councillor Hawkins has indicated, I think it's appropriate that we have a general Q&A, which would allow you to ask questions specific to any part of the presentation. It's a bit unique today in that, you know, normally we would have a presentation on each of the reports. We felt, for the very nature of all the information that Tim and Mr. Morski have shared today, that it was important for council to get that in its entirety. But I would suggest that we go to a general Q&A and then we move to the reports, which will allow then a further opportunity for specific questions, because it was our intent to ensure that Mr. Morski and Mr. Reid and the team was here throughout the entire discussion if there's specific questions that council may have.
Well, I'm highly adaptable, so it sounds good to me. I'm sure we can handle it that way, so that's where we'll move through it. We'll still have this 3 separate votes, and we'll allow the questions to go, and I won't call anyone in breach. So I think first up, we have Councillor Shaw.
Okay, so since you guys are discussing how the wording question is supposed to be going, I'm not sure where it's going to fall into line. Can I ask the parking question first through the chair?
Yeah, we're going to take general questions.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to start with a boring question, sorry. Through the chair, I would just like to give you my experience working with the Mosaic Stadium to get wheelchair parking for our people on game day was a challenge I faced for 1.5 years. Now, mark my words, I do not want to ever go through that again, nor do the people of Regina want to ever go through that again. So, through the chair, my question is, we talk about parking spaces, we talk about being inclusive and making sure everybody can get around this facility, and I understand the challenges that go with busing with people with wheelchairs, and that's a whole nother issue. But I would like to know, first and foremost, is this something that has been on the radar? Is this something that we're going to talk about? Is this something that we're going to discuss? Now, I know we didn't discuss this with you, Tim, but I know that we've had discussions about this future. I just want to make sure that this is something that's, you know, on the forefront of your parking discussions through the chair.
Mr. Reid?
Yeah, through the chair, I think we would echo your sentiments about the importance. I actually, we use Mosaic Stadium as a good example of our approach in the past. We build buildings and not a site. And so we build a Mosaic Stadium and we go, it's got to have this many accessible entrants and this many parking stalls, but what we don't recognize is that it's a 107-acre site. And I think the opportunity through the chair that we have, and working with your administration, I think we need to be held accountable to, is this isn't about a building. And when we treat this as 10 or 12 or 15 buildings on a campus, it just doesn't work, and you've experienced that. Because the challenge with it is Mosaic Stadium may not be busy, but the Brand Center might be uber busy, and that creates overflow issues at the cooperators. So I think what we've committed to in working with your administration is a really strong understanding of site accessibility. So your comments are heard. I don't have all the answers for it, but I will say what's fundamental is a long-term discussion and actually an approval of an approach to a site versus buildings. And if you think about the last 15 years of the relationship that we've shared, we talk about buildings often, but we don't talk about site, which is actually why I think our site accessibility and functionality is frankly as poor as it is. And so, through the chair, I think the opportunity is to build a plan now that considers the entire site and not just buildings. Yes, we are committed to making sure that it's accessible to every user, but that has to start with talking about 107 acres versus, a 30,000 person football stadium or a, 20,000 person get-together. Right now, the opportunity is how do we build a site better than it is. Certainly the feedback we get from your administration is lots of support for that. And I think from a planning perspective, we just need to be held accountable to that. So yes, it's a priority for us. I think the opportunity is what's being proposed today, and I think we can be better than we are.
Okay, thank you, and I'm going to hold you all to that. My second question, through the chair, Phase 2, you talked about the parkade for the hospital to be built 2 years sooner. Just a question about that parkade. Is that parkade going to be a money-generating parkade, through the chair?
Yeah, through the chair. So it actually probably services two needs, and yes, it is a profitable endeavor.
Okay.
We've looked at it privately of is there an ability for us to do this? We've had interest from private groups that are looking to operate this. We've had interest from the hospital themselves looking to do so. For those of you that have seen the development at the Pasqua space is becoming more limited, and it is becoming a challenge in North Central in terms of street parking as well as overflow into the real site. We haven't had a lot of challenges with that because we're not highly activated, but we will see those challenges come right away. So yes, it is profitable. Depending on what builds next to it, if an arena builds next to it, it becomes $1 million more profitable. If an arena doesn't build next to it, it's still a very profitable endeavor. So the idea with it is right now the Pasqua Hospital has about 1,400 employees. About 1,000 of them work during the day, 400 of them work during the evening. During the daytime, we're never very busy, and in the evening, we're very busy. And so the idea was it would be complementary use. Drive Pasqua employee parking during the day, and then drive event parking in the evenings. So yes, it's profitable. It actually could be very profitable if the arena lands there, but it also meets the needs of the hospital as well as our user groups going forward.
Thank you, and I appreciate that because my other job, I deal lots with the hospitals, and I've heard this concern with our nurses and our staff for years. So I appreciate that. The third question, this is not about parking. The challenge that we face, is there a challenge that we face to secure that $2.4 million through the chair?
Yeah, through the chair, just to be clear, the grant funding for the casino grant? Yeah, through the chair, absolutely. Certainly the preliminary discussions that we've shared with government is, I don't think that there is an active desire to remove that funding opportunity from either ourselves or Saskatoon. But I do think we have to be creative in how we continue that funding. So in the past, that deal was relative to the casino venture. So they took the casino rights in exchange for a long 30-year term on $2.6 million. That $2.6 million is very comparable to what Saskatoon receives in Regina. And so I think we just have to put something in front of them that is a fairly compelling ask for that $2.6 million to continue. And I'm not sure that we've done that yet. We've certainly made it known that we would like it to continue. And the feedback that we have had is not negative. Nobody runs out of the room, but I think the sentiment, and Mr. Holden and I talk about this often, is at some point in the next couple of years, we're going to have to align as a city and as your asset and put a request in front of government. But $2.6 million is not an insignificant sum, and I think we should secure it. So no, it's not guaranteed. Yes, I think we have to be creative in what they fund for $2.6 million, but I think there's an opportunity to continue it.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Stadenchuk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you for a very detailed and organized presentation. I just had a couple of questions through the chair. I'm trying to see this in relation as well with the core partnership agreement, the committee that's supposed to be meeting. So I'm not sure if they have met yet, and I am asking whether or not all your discussion about option 1 and 2 in terms of where the arena is located is going to be contingent on that core partnership committee meeting.
Yeah, through the chair. So certainly the proposals that we have followed the core partnership framework in terms of what is core, what's context, and what's non-core. And we're quite confident that the models are in alignment with that document. Although we haven't met yet as a committee, I think it's going to happen soon. I get the sense that the team is trying to schedule that. And in terms of the future of the arena, my understanding is A potential mid-sized mixed-purpose use arena works in 4 of the jurisdictions considered in that document. So it works on our site based on the approval of the committee, and it also works in 3 other sites. And I'm just trying to remember what they are. I think there was discussion that it would fit into the warehouse district, it would fit downtown, and there was maybe one other location that it would fit within. So yes, it is compliant with that document. It's probably the short answer.
Okay, no, so, but the committee hasn't met yet, okay. In terms of the, I'm going to jump to the YQR distillery. Was there any tendering done for that proposal before it came forward? Through the chair.
Absolutely, through the chair. So our process, and consistent with what we outlined, is we did essentially an official unveiling that said we're open for business once you as council gave us the approval to do so. We hired a real estate firm, which is Colliers locally, that manages the real estate interests. And essentially it's been on the market for the best part of 6 months and available on a first-come, first-served basis. Now, YQR Distilleries did come forward to us through Colliers, and they approached us, and we got the deal done essentially in partnership. So it wasn't a tendering process, it was an open real estate call, and essentially consistent for anybody that wanted to come forward. And very consistent with the approach that we have, it has to be based on market value rates, and we have to justify that the leasing is competitive. So they worked through Colliers, they supported us in getting the deal done. So no, it wasn't a public, I guess it was just an open call for business more than a tender process.
Okay. All right, thank you. Through the chair, the price of the lease is $10 a square foot. In the report, it does say that Colliers says that's average or market, whatever. How does that compare to other rental space in Regina?
Yeah, so what I can say is it's exactly the same number for all other independent rentals that we have on campus. So if you were to talk to the Subway operators, the Western Pizza operators, or the Pats as a lease space, or the Riders as a lease space, it's $10 a square foot is essentially where we land. And so that's the baseline that we use. I think it is comparable to what we see in other locations in Regina. In fact, it's probably a little bit on the heavy side just because we feel we're more attractive than some other locations. So yes, it's competitive, and it's exactly the same that we see on campus today.
Through the chair, I think this might be my last question. So I understand your rationale for the 40-year lease. At first I thought that's really excessively long because no business will really know if they are going to be in business that long. But your explanation about the financial aspect of it in order to borrow then kind of explained it. Through that lease during that time, well, I guess it would be negotiated, I assume, if the business was not able to continue, would that just be negotiated in terms of what happens to that lease?
Yeah, through the chair, very similar to any commercial real estate partnership. I think what's important for you as the owner to recognize is you would retain the assets. So any improvements to the site, the fixturing, the facilities would essentially become yours. You would recover from a credit position everything that you could based on the lease commitment, but ultimately you'd find yourself in a place like anybody that has a building, you'd have to go find a new tenant for that building. But in this scenario, you'd pick up $8 million or $10 million of capital investments. So if it was to forfeit, you'd likely end up with a better building than you have today. But obviously our hope is that tenant would be there for 40 years and beyond. So very similar to any other real estate play where you'd have to manage a business that went under, but you would retain the assets.
Okay. No more questions. Thank you.
Next up, we have Councillor Zakiniak.
Is there other questions? Can we come back to me? Because I might have one or two more.
We can do that. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the presentation. So my first question is about the campus lease, and would it be appropriate for administration as well to respond if it relates to the city?
We haven't moved the report yet. This is still the portion with delegation, so we should probably hold that off till.
All right. So what we're effectively doing is allowing for Real to enter into a long-term, basically property management relationship, right? for property that we own as a municipality. And I ask this question not about the individuals here today, but it's an accountability question. Great package of information. I support the vision and strategy. What if something changes? What if the real leadership and the exercise of this plan falls short? We're locked into an agreement with Real. But what if you fail in that target? The financials and the reality are very different. None of this materializes. Are we then not on the hook for the next 40 years or longer with a governance body that actually is not fulfilling any of the objectives we set up? So in this lease agreement, perhaps this can be to the city manager as well when he has an opportunity, what level of accountability is bolted into this to make sure that you fulfill this end of the bargain over a very long period of time?
So, through the chair, and I may speak candidly, and then your administration can speak to this. At the end of the day, you appoint the board. And my experience kind of advising these scenarios as well as coming in after these scenarios have taken place, council steps in, they remove the entire board, you became the active members of the board. You either vote down the company or reposition the company, which you would have the right to do, and then you can do whatever you want with it. And so I know that's somewhat crass because it's the last place you want to go in a relationship like this. But I think what you're describing is in a scenario where there's a gross failure or neglect on behalf of the city. In that scenario, I think it's quite simple. You would take over the management of the board. You would either reposition the corporate governance structure or wind down the company as you see fit, and you would do as you please. I think it's really important to recognize through the chair that ultimately you as council, because you appoint the board, have ultimate governance control. Right now, you've made the decision that you can acquire talent from the public sector to help us act in an entrepreneurial way and govern the board. If you found yourself in a place that had changed, I think very similar to what you do with your departments, you would step in, you'd take it over, you'd put management in place, and you'd move it in a different direction. And so, obviously, we'd hate for that to happen, and we're optimistic it won't, but we'll be respectful of administrative comments. But my experience in this, being on this side of governance bodies my entire career, is in a place where you fall short, council just takes over the business and runs it themselves.
Thank you. Second question, this is coming to council because we're bypassing what would otherwise be an open tendering process for another company to come in and do the same work. How does this compare with similar venues? You've canvassed dozens of campuses like this. Is it typically this kind of bidding process? And secondly, is it usually for this long period of time, given the asset we're talking about?
Yeah, through the chair, maybe two questions to that is our approach to how we canvass business. Is it similar? I would say so. I think in most cases this is actually led by a private company. And so what's unique about our scenario, although there are some in Canada, there's about 80% of these ventures are normally driven by private enterprise in collaboration with the city. What I will say is, so it's not necessarily uncommon in terms of where we are. In terms of the term lease, I think this is the standard. So if you were to look at the Ice District in Edmonton, the new development in Canada, or frankly the repositioning, probably the most current one is some of you may have seen that Ontario Place was tendered last week for probably the most valuable piece of land that exists in Canada, and it's exactly this model on a 40-year lease. And so I do believe that this is the standard. What's unique about the scenario that we have is you have a municipal enterprise in Real that does this on your behalf. And so we're somewhat moving into this space on your behalf, where other cities have just partnered privately, perhaps different, because they didn't have an agency like yourself. So yes, I do believe it's the standard. And I think it respects the fact that ultimately the land is owned by the taxpayer and someday goes back to them.
Thank you.
So.
Next up, we have Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The first question I have, I regret that I have to ask it, and I wouldn't have to ask it under the new model if it all went through, but we're still under the old model. And it's a question about YQR. Who are the principals behind Sperling Silver Distillery?
Through the chair, driver is Adam Sperling, so he's the majority owner. Adam Sperling is a longtime member of our hospitality sector, who started up a number of restaurants in our community and establishments and ran them for a bunch of years. So he's spent his life in Regina. This is where he calls home. He's a Red Seal chef. He's built and delivered, I think, 3 prominent restaurants, although I can't remember the names of them, but you would probably recognize them. He's in operations right now under Sperling Distilleries, and he's the principal owner of the company.
Thank you, that's helpful. answers a little bit the next question. This is would be an important tenant for you. Have you done the proper risk analysis on the viability of this tenant, their ability to carry out their obligations under the proposed lease, and other risk analysis factors that should be considered?
Yeah, through the chair, from a financing standpoint, we've done our due diligence to assure that the funds available to be able to manage the capital investment as well as the first 3 years of operations are in place. So we believe from a startup standpoint, the business can weather the startup challenges of capital investment as well as beginning. The company has additionally shared their 20-year operating projections with us in detail, and we've sent them through our finance team as well as our legal team to validate. So they've been quite compliant and open with the sharing of their business plan. We think it's quite reasonable. As with any startup business, we think there's risk. But from what we can sell, our due diligence has been done on the capital side, as well as a multi-year operational approach, and the business model seems sound based on what we understand of our campus. So I believe so, through the chair.
Thank you. I take some comfort in that. The next questions are more general questions. And the next one might cause both you and the city manager to have a heart attack. Where's the swimming pool in all of this, if anywhere?
So through the chair, I can speak to perhaps our planning. Very early on, we had modeled whether a swimming pool would fit on our campus, and there was opportunities for it, but I'm not sure that I would suggest that it was in any way a perfect fit. So right now, the swimming pool, from our strategy perspective, is likely off campus. Obviously, our preference would be that amenity shows up somewhere around Taylor Field, so it's close. I don't want to minimize the value of having your recreational amenities clustered, and so I think our position to city management has always been, as you endeavor to build a new swimming pool or aquatic facility, the closer to the real campus, we think the better.
Thank you. Next also deals with specific facilities. You mentioned that it would cost $1 million, I can't remember in which phase, to put a dome on the soccer pitch. There are places in Regina where you can't buy a house for $1 million. I'm amazed at that price. Are you serious?
Yeah, so we validated that. We used two models, one from the University of Alberta and one from the University of Toronto. Both have a practice where they run an outdoor synthetic field, and then they put a dome up and take it down. The cost of the dome structure capitally is about $1 million. The cost to put it up annually is about $100,000.
Thank you. The arena. Let me ask you this question. Do you and your board have a preference for where the arena should be?
Yeah. So through the chair, I might say that, and I'll respect our board chair, I'm not sure that my preference would be the same as our entire board's at this time.
Okay.
And I mean that because we're having some great discussion on it. I think the approach that our board has said, and that's why you saw it the way today, was plan for the potential of an arena being on site, plan for the potential of an arena not being on site. To be very specific on that question, I think the biggest fear that we have not been able to calculate right now is what's the impact to our visitor economy if you decouple an arena from the other assets at Evraz Place. And so most communities, you see it in Calgary, you've seen it in Edmonton, Saskatoon talks about it, pair their convention space with their arena because it allows those major event hostings. We've already invested at Evraz Place. A downtown arena is a bit of a natural, but is 2.4 kilometers between downtown and Evraz Place too far to pull that together? We don't know. So the risk that we see is, do you hurt yourself on hosting large events if you pull it away? Flip side to it is, what's the impact of a new arena in the downtown core? And what's the potential tax lift that you could experience? So I actually think we as a board are quite torn, which is why the work that's happening by the committee is so important, because we'll get some clear financial data on that.
Thank you. Is there anything in the decisions that we're being asked as a council today that will lock us into any aspect of a future arena?
Through the chair, no, there's not.
And is there anything in any of the decisions that we're taking today that predetermines who might be a tenant in a future arena if one is ever built?
Through the chair, no, there's not.
Thank you. I want to ask a question about the retention pond and the 25-year flooding. Up until maybe the beginning of this summer, I might not have thought about this at all, but it seems like seems like 25-year projections on the weather are now no longer something to be taken as an absolute. Before you build a stage in a retention pond, first of all, would the stage be able to resist the filling of the retention pond? And secondly, would you consider with new climate models the possibility that that retention pond is full more often than any of us would like?
Through the chair, I want to be a bit cautious to it, so I may flip to it. I think what's really changed in our model when you look at the overall design drawings of our campus is the fact that with us removing the south side commercial development at this time, one of the opportunities that that does afford us is the development of a detention pond that pulls on the south side. And so being able to move water on that south side is quite easy, and it actually makes a nicer walking trail. So if you think of this model, I think where we have the detention pond, you still have the ability to move standing water. And what we've talked about in our designs is moving it along that walking path that is on the south side. And so what's fundamentally changed is we actually have lots of ability to store water if we need to, because we've moved a bunch of commercial development that is now walking trail and pedestrian traffic. And so in our modeling, and we have had those discussions, we've modeled that you push the water to the south side, essentially just north of the tracks. And it creates a bit of a nicer walking field, as well as a bit of marshland, and provides some opportunities.
The next question, thank you. The next question, the second to last, is this council is firmly committed to renewable Regina by 2050. And I think it's fair to say that this council takes the environment very, very seriously. What measures have you incorporated into this planning that will ensure us state-of-the-art protection for the environment? I noticed there were solar panels, I think, on the YQR building. That's a drawing. Seriously, how are you going to look after the environment as you move forward with this plan?
Yeah, through the chair, and I'm probably going to give you an answer that's uber vague, which traditionally I don't like to do, is I don't actually think we have clarity from you, with all due respect. And I want to be sensitive to that. You know, my experience is in other jurisdictions, it's quite clear. You'll build to a LEED gold standard, or a LEED silver, or a LEED this, or a carbon capture footprint. And so I think there is an opportunity in this development for us to work with your administration to set the standard by which we develop municipal enterprise. And so I think it's very unclear right now. We have a principled commitment to sustainability as a board. You have a principled commitment to Vision 2050. There's no black and white where to go, which is actually why I think the planning process of this is so important. And if we do it right, I think it becomes a standard by which others can respond to. Right now, I can't tell you we're building to a LEED standard or a carbon capture standard. What I can tell you is we're building to a vision of 2050, and we're respectful of that. I'm not sure what that means on paper. And so we are working with your planning department, and I want to minimize that. So where there's opportunities for solar, where there's opportunity for heat capture, where there's opportunity for development of buildings that move airflow differently, where there's opportunity to make outdoor spaces more winter friendly, we've had those conversations. But I think that's why the next phase of this, when we come back to you with a detailed site plan in 90 days, is so important. But I will highlight through the chair, that is, you know, that's a barrier that I think between your administration and ourselves we have to close the gap on. And I'm confident we will. It's just not black and white right now.
Through you, and again, this is a question really for your board as well, are you prepared to commit to require your future tenants to meet these environmental standards, recognizing there's a responsibility on us, the city administration, to set those standards high?
Through the chair, I think our board has already taken that position and is supportive of it. I think the tenants that we want to embrace on our campus are the ones that support the vision of the city long term. And the reality of it is if you think about the space that we play in, there's few better examples that you have to set a vision around environmental sustainability than sports, entertainment, and recreation. You know, the most modern NHL stadium was just built with the highest environmental standards that may exist on the planet. We can be a showcase for you. We would like to be. We'd like to work with you on it. So yes, we're committed to it. Strategically, the board has already endorsed that vision, and we would not accept tenants that were not willing to partner with that vision. We just need to be able to define what it is.
Thank you. A showcase is a critical part of your answer, I think. Last question is this, Mr. Reid. You're probably one of the best salespersons in the country. And you've just given us a pretty magnificent sales pitch.
Appreciate that.
I want to ask you, if you were sitting in our chairs, what risks would you be worried about? Would you share the potential risks with us?
That's a broad question, and I think actually the risk is probably bigger than the presentation that you've seen today. So the Chair, I actually think the presentation that you've seen today is common sense. You know, do we need a long-term deal? Yes, we need a long-term deal. Should we commercialize land that's sat empty for 40 years because we can make better use of it? Yes, we probably should. Should we support local business and growing the economy? Yeah, we probably should. And so with the utmost respect to Council, I recognize the decisions are significant. I actually think most of them are driven with common sense, and it's actually just what we should do. You know, the risks that I think we need to endeavor is some of the learnings that we've had through COVID. I think we've recognized that we're grossly under-resourced in recreational infrastructure. You know, we're putting pickleball courts and basketball courts into a barn because our kids didn't have a place to play. You know, I think Mr. Lacey echoed the challenges that we have on capital improvements and the infrastructure deficit that's national. You deal with that every day in the city, but we deal with it every day on council or on campus, and there's just not enough money to pay for these things in the traditional form. I think the fact that we have $100 million in debt on a CFL stadium, and we were dangerously close to losing a CFL this year, should be a red flag for us. And I think, you know, as a city and as a populace, we have an immense opportunity to recover from COVID and drive the economy back to health, which we need to focus on. But then I think there is risk around borrowing and inflation that perhaps we haven't seen in our generation. And so all that being said, I'm not sure that what we have in front of you today are the primary risks. I think when we talk about the Everest Place campus and the plan that's in front of you, I actually think they're more long-term. You know, what do we do with recreation? How do we figure out a long-term sustainability plan for the stadium? Because as Mr. Lacey said, it's going to ebb and flow. I'm fairly certain that when that ebbs and flows to the end, it's not going to look as good as it did in the original model. Just, it won't. How do we manage the recovery of our economy? And then how do we pay for the recovery of that economy long-term? And what happens if, you know, inflation goes to 5 or 6% interest and our economy changes dramatically overnight? So I'm not sure that those are the answers you wanted to hear through the chair, but I would say those were the ones that we should focus on collectively, and they're going to take every bit of the leadership that we have to find a path forward in those elements.
Thank you. I appreciate very much the time that you and your team have taken with us to make this presentation and to the answer to your question. And Mr. Chair, I appreciate your patience in allowing us to develop this context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hawkins. It's 11:15. We have a mandated break for 15 minutes. If we want to take a 15-minute break, it'd be the time to do it. Okay. I'd like to call the meeting back to order. Where we left off was questions. They were on the broad topic as we had discussed, and Councillor Bresciani was up next. Please feel free to go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. It is a lot of information. So I just have a couple questions in regards to, and first of all, I do remember when you did come to council. And I remember it like yesterday, because that was a question that new councillors at that time were asking is, why are we always paying $800,000 a year back to real? What are they doing? So we did ask you to come back with some options. So I appreciate all of the work here. I would like to know, so we did have a discussion a year ago about the undergrounds. So who is paying for the undergrounds? We, the city, own the land. Who is paying for the undergrounds for the development that's taking place? Through the chair.
It is a bit of a unique scenario depending on the client and frankly depending on how long their run is from the undergrounds. I think one of the learnings that we've had, and certainly city administration can speak to this, is there is a large utility corridor that runs right along Pasqua Street, which is essentially in this line, because it's not marked particularly well, the On the left-hand side, you'll see a dotted line that runs between the detention pond and essentially up into the ITC. There is a trunk corridor of utilities that run there. And so part of what makes this design incredibly efficient is you can push to the retail units on the right side or the left side with very, very small connection points. In most of those scenarios, McDonald's is a good example, they are paying for the connectivity to it. So the existing utilities have the capacity to manage what is proposed on that development. If we start adding things like new arenas and new hockey rinks, we'll have to revisit that in the future. But certainly for the retail and the commercial side that is proposed, it is manageable. In terms of connections for other amenities such as the hotel, those are ones that are in the lease negotiations with us. So we will manage those connections, but in most cases it is managed by the developer. In terms of the south side corridor of utilities, we're not moving any of those. But if there was a desire to move those, literally I think every agency that's involved in utilities would become engaged. The city would be engaged, SaskTel would be engaged, SaskPower would be engaged, and so it's quite a complex scenario. So short answer is a little bit of everything. The majority of our clients are connecting themselves and they cover the cost of it. Some of our more substantial ones, we are covering the cost of the connection just because the deal structure is so much greater.
Great, thank you. So do you see any, and I think Councillor Hawkins had asked about the risk, but do you see any long-term implications at all in regards to this proposal here at all? Through the chair.
Yeah, through the chair. You know, I think any time that you look at 40-year timelines, that's essentially the best part of a generation. And our assumption is that the generation ahead of us and the one that we are leading wants this to be a exhibition grounds that's multi-use and recreational and entertainment based. You know, I think the challenge is always what happens if people change their thoughts. And so probably the biggest risk in this is just the fact that it's such a long term. But the reality of it is that long term gives the proponents looking to build value. And so as much as they need the value to be able to secure the financing, I think that probably is the greatest risk. That being said, we've been around for 136 years. We continue to do the exhibition every year, and I'm not sure that in the next 40 years, sports, entertainment, and exhibition associations change that dramatically. I think those things still happen, and I believe that based on best practice across Canada, combining those amenities with commercial enterprise and commercial experience is essentially what the country is doing. So I can't imagine it will change in our jurisdiction faster than anywhere else.
Great, thank you. So I support the long-term lease for real, for sure. It's just a way to do business, and when you are connecting with now doing commercial development there, I would agree that they will not commit if there's not a long-term lease in place. Is that's accurate?
Through the chair, that's an accurate statement.
Okay.
100%.
I do want to ask about, you have committed with Colliers, is that right?
We have, through the chair.
To do all of the development. Was there a consultation process to, I guess the question I have is why only one? Why not have a few come forward? Because anytime now someone comes forward, they have to go through Colliers. Colliers also does their own. Does that impact any kind of development that may not come now because it's Colliers? Through the chair.
Yeah, through the chair, we publicly tendered that process looking for a real estate partner, and so I think there was 5 submissions.
5 or 6, yeah.
5 or 6 submissions. Very competitive process. Colliers was ultimately the successful candidate. I think in a scenario like ours, having one real estate partner was advantageous. That doesn't mean that other commercial real estate agents can't engage with them, and they are. To your comment, yes, Colliers does have a sale as well as a buying side of their business or representative side. That being said, they make sure that there's segregation between the agents, no different than it would be in your own house sale if there was that transaction. So I think it is the standard that we needed just because of the complexity of the site. And to be honest, I think Colliers have done a remarkably good job of advocating the sale. So it may not be perfect. I think it was a public process, and to be honest, I think it's the standard that other organizations use and probably the appropriate fit. That being said, there's always opportunity for growth.
Okay, thank you for that. In regards to the Agribition brings in about $44 million a year to our city.
Yeah.
And you've indicated that you have connected with Agribition Board is to the plans here. Obviously, it's public, so, but is there any, I guess, concerns or anything like that regarding the Agribition, like that will still continue to be part of this through the chair?
Yeah, through the chair. So we have an agreement based on this proposal with Agribition, where essentially we purchased some space back for them and provided them some alternative space. So I think certainly Agribition is on side with this. I think obviously when we talk about 40-year lease terms, we have to understand as much about what Agribition looks like in the future as they do about our campus. And so I want to come back to the purpose of this. It really starts to shift our partners' lens to what do we look like in 40 years versus 4. And so, yes, Agribition is part of this. Yes, we've modeled them to continue to be, and we believe they should be for the next 40 years of our operations. But if approved today, I think it does start to change the discussions that we have with Agribition or FC Regina to how do we talk about 20, 30, 40 years versus 4 or 5 year agreements, which allows everybody to plan differently. So yes, we believe Agribition stays on site. Yes, I believe they're satisfied with the outcome. But ultimately, I think there is a desire to talk about not what Agribition 2025 looks like, but what does Agribition 2040 look like? And this helps us have those discussions.
Thank you. Moving forward with all of this development on site, would it be fair to say or that having these amenities will actually increase more, I'm going to say activation, but also events to this campus because of hotel, McDonald's, the YQR distillery? Like, are these things that do you think would be assets to hosting a conference here in our city? To the chair.
Yeah, through the chair. I mean, all of you have had experiences at conferences and you've had experience at live sporting events and live entertainment events. This is the standard now. The concept of a whole bunch of buildings and a sea of parking just isn't the way it's done anymore because you have to extend the stay of your client. Where we used to go to a football game for 3 hours, the next generation wants a 7.5-hour experience. They want to go to a dinner and a football game and a club, and they want to spend differently than perhaps we did. So I do think this is, all of us would have experience. This is the standard. Coming back to a specific that you mentioned, when we look to secure conferences and conventions, the first question that they ask is how much square feet do you have? The second question that they ask is do you have an adjacent hotel? And so that hotel piece is important to us in how we present. And then ultimately, I think to your comment, it just makes us a more attractive campus. When you walk through and there's restaurant opportunities and there's bar opportunities and there's a little bit of retail. So yes, ultimately it makes us more competitive. Without question, the development of the hotel is something that we need.
Great. The having these amenities on site, though, does that ever limit what you guys can do for, like, example, a couple weekends ago, the Rib Fest was there. Sometimes when you sign leases, you cannot do certain things. So you can't have maybe McDonald's, can't have another one that sells burgers. Like, is there anything in these that would say, okay, no more Rib Fest, or, those kinds of things that would kind of inhibit those community things through the chair?
Yeah, through the chair, I want to be sensitive to being clear. I think every commercial tenant that comes in tries to protect their interest. So the hotel will say you can't have another hotel on site, or we get first right of refusal is normally how it's managed. Yeah. And so if ever there's a need for another hotel or another fast food place, they get first right of refusal, and if they refuse, you can move forward. McDonald's is a great example. They limit the ability for fast food burger places. And that being said, we probably don't want more than one of them anyways. And so, yes, there are limitations commercially with all of our vendors. And so I wouldn't want to minimize that, those restrictions are in place. I don't think it restricts us in any way. It does not restrict us around our special events. So even though McDonald's has a clause that restricts the use of burger joints that are fast food burger joints that would compete with them, we can still do a dine-in restaurant that has burgers. We can still serve burgers at the QCX. What it does is it just means you can't move Wendy's in next door to them.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't, there's lots of flexibility in the contract language to allow us to continue our events.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you. Confederation Park. It's a very historic piece for Regina. What are, what's the plan for Confederation Park to ensure that that history stays and that it becomes kind of almost a pillar within that recreation campus? Through the chair.
Yeah, through the chair, it's a great comment. I actually think Confederation Park might be one of the most beautiful parks we have in the city. I think it is the most difficult park to access that we have.
Yes.
And so, as you can see in some of our pedestrian connectivity pieces, a couple things that we need to do, and it is in our model. A, we need to pull some amenities into Confederation Park to make it a place that is easier to have a community barbecue or a cultural barbecue or a graduation ceremony. Those things aren't easy, they're expensive right now. And so we need to pull some amenities into the park just to make it work for mixed use. I think the biggest thing we have to do is we have to connect it to a pedestrian pathway that encourages you to go there. So right now we program it quite a bit. In fact, I think we've probably programmed it even more in the last few years. You'll see some new investment into it around winter events this year, as you would know. But ultimately, I think the biggest gap is we just got to connect it. We have to make sure it's part of a walking trail system and that it is a destination, because right now it's just a park in a sea of parking lot attached to a stadium. And so people don't go there. So we think we need to incorporate that into the design. We need to add some infrastructure so it's easy to use. And then we're optimistic it becomes a great place for a community to recreate in a very passive and not actively programmed way.
Great, thank you. In the one plan that we did see at one time, there was some housing for seniors in a large, in an apartment. Is that still part of the discussion, or is that off the table? Or where is that at, through the chair?
Yeah, through the chair. The reality of it is it fits on the south side of our property. So if you think about those drawings, it actually fit kind of adjacent to Confederation Park on the south side. What we started to realize was there was a $5 million cost to move utilities to start that. And so it just became cost prohibitive. What I will say is we've met with your administration team as well as the investors looking to advance that to talk about where else in the city that might go. So yes, we do have an opportunity around Everest Place, but it doesn't really fit. I think part of our conversations with your administration is, hey, could this be a anchor development in the build-out of Taylor Field or build-out of some other amenities downtown? So yeah, still in play is what I would say. We just don't think it fits at Real. And we've had conversations between the owner, the city, and ourselves to talk about where that could all fit.
Great.
But it's a good opportunity for those buildings to go somewhere else, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would support. That's why I asked. I think it's not the right place for senior housing.
Agreed.
So, Mr. Chair, is this a time I can make a comment as well? Or because
it's not on the floor yet, so maybe we'll wait till we finish with the portion with the delegations and go through to the formal part of the policy.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you. I just want to say thank you for the work. This has been a long time coming, so thank you for that.
Thank you, through the chair.
Councillor Skiniak.
Okay. So my first question is, if we grant the 40-year lease to Real, when would we see proposed leases at council? Like, would that happen if it was? Would that still happen, and when?
Yeah, through the chair, and I may ask Mr. Holden just to comment if I step offside, or Roberta, if you've got a comment. You will only see a proposed lease come forward to council if it breached the terms of our agreement. And so if it was outside of the 40-year terms, if it was beyond the intended use of the site, or didn't fit into the plan, or provided a risk threshold to the city that may not be compliant with the original agreement. So as long as it was consistent with what we've shown today and within the site plan and within the terms of the agreement, which essentially are 40 years, then it would be approved by the city manager. If it was outside of those, it would come to you as council for approval.
Okay, thank you. So for my next question, so Councillor Hawkins actually asked some of the questions I was going to ask in relation to environmental sustainability, but I have a follow-up based on some of the questions he was asking. So it sounds like through the site master plan, there is the opportunity for some additional clarity in relation to how, more specifically, how environmental sustainability is embedded in the development of the site. Is that something that you folks are prepared to work on with administration, or are you asking for council guidance to help sort out the parameters of that?
Through the chair, I think your comments are spot on in terms of, I think we are looking for clear guidance in terms of where to go. So from our perspective, and I use the term with purpose, I do think we're a bit of a flagship example of how you build in our city. You know, it's easy to see, lots of people get to. So through the chair, I think we would welcome council input on those expectations. That being said, whether that input comes through your administration or frankly you want to participate more formally, and I think we'd be delighted to have those conversations. I think ultimately this is a good opportunity for our city. It's a good opportunity for you as council to showcase where you want to go. And I think between our administrations we have some idea of that, but I'm not sure that that idea is finite or precise. So I won't speak for Mr. Holden, but I don't know that I've got a to-do list of this is how you build. That would be really helpful for us. And given just frankly the visibility of this site, I think we'd welcome any feedback that council has or any participation you may want to have in what those parameters look like. And obviously I think between our administrations we can put the details in place to deliver to those standards. So yeah, we'd love to have your input. That being said, we trust that Mr. Holden and his team will get it to us if you're not actively engaged.
Okay, so I think I'll have a follow-up question for administration. Should I wait till we move the report, or should we do that right now?
Please wait.
Okay, and and in terms of the site master plan, so I believe it's 90 days after, if we approve this, that you'll be bringing a draft site master plan to us. So will that be in advance of any further lease? So like we have the YQR distillery that we're considering today, and then so prior to any other consideration of leases, will this site master plan be in place?
Yeah, it's a great question. Through the chair, I may just seek Roberta or administrative feedback. I think if this was approved, it would allow us to advance leases based on the criteria. That being said, we do need to develop development standards for this site, which come after the site plan is approved. So there's probably two steps to it. One is if another, now I don't foresee that we have one. We might see one in the hotel opportunity within 90 days. In fact, I think we will see one. So that would not, per my understanding, have to come back to council. That would be based on the approval of the city manager if approved. But we are accountable to bringing you detailed site plan as well as detailed development standards from an architectural standpoint subsequent to the site plan approval. So you could still, although the lease would be in place, we could still finalize the development standards by which they would have to build.
Okay, yeah, and that was my question. I think you just answered it. So whatever is planned through the site master plan, folks who signed leases prior to that, they will still be accountable to those standards? They won't be grandfathered in because they signed prior to the site master plan?
Yes, through the chair. It still has to go through the full planning process that it would with anybody else. And given the fact that we have some zoning amendments, I think there's plenty of opportunity to make sure that we're clear with the standards by which we expect.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
And all of that does come back to you as council.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have.
Thank you. Next up, we have Councillor Stadnichuk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, there's one more question that I had through the chair, and it's regarding the plans for a hotel. There is a hotel that already exists at Dudney and Leuven, just north of the site. Is it viable to also have a hotel on the site, and what is the impact on, the other hotels in the city?
Yeah, through the chair, great question. I want to be clear that I think the hotel industry is one that has probably suffered the most significance from COVID-19. Going into our plans, there was sensitivity amongst the hotel owners and operators about vacancy rates and how this will impact our hotels. What I will say is we've made it mandatory for our hotel partner to become a member of the Regina Hotel Association. So for the first 5 years of any contract going forward, they have to be an active member. So they will contribute essentially to the bed tax fee that exists and to drive business. I think I do want to be clear, going into COVID, there was sensitivity amongst the hotel operators. Coming out of COVID, I'm sure there will be even more sensitivity. Our position on this has been, it's a capital market, and hoteliers do their due diligence, and I have no doubt that somebody wouldn't spend $30 or $40 million if they didn't think it was a viable business. And so I believe that the private investors have done their due diligence, and they're well-versed in hotel operations across Western Canada. So they're quite comfortable that the business model works. Our belief is, when we're very busy as a city, we lose events because we don't have enough hotel rooms. And so there is a challenge in terms of capacity. That being said, I don't want to be insensitive or unclear in the fact that I think the hotel industry is struggling, and any competition, of which we've seen lots, can be a challenge in these times.
Okay, thank you. And through the chair, so just in terms of the overall plan, we want to see the area, the campus to be viable financially. But I do have a bit of a concern if there is in any way that we are creating an unfair advantage to any businesses that locate there compared to other businesses like in the warehouse district or downtown. Is that, and I don't know if that's something that would be separate from the core partnership, core framework partnership, because you're talking about the development of your campus. But have you also had some sensitive considerations about, are you going to be taking away business from other districts in the city?
Yeah, through the chair, I don't think any of the models that we've had, or certainly the models that we've seen from our partners, have been about displacement of existing business. I think it's focused on growth or opportunity of business that's lost. And I want to be sensitive to, is there a competitive advantage? 3.7 million visitors a year, I think, is a competitive advantage. And I don't want to minimize that. I don't know what the warehouse district does or downtown does, but we have a unique value proposition that fits with some partners. So if that's a competitive advantage, then yes, we would be advantaging those individuals. But that being said, every business, any business that's in the warehouse district or downtown that wanted to expand, there's still acres available today. So they've chosen not to. So I want to be sensitive. I think we got a great site with unique advantage around it. Are we doing anything above, frankly, providing a 40-year land lease at market value? No, we're not. That being said, when you do join our campus, we do our best to promote you and to support driving business to you. But in most cases, whether it's a restaurant or a hotel, when we activate, it fills many restaurants in the city, not just one, and many hotels in the city. So it's always bigger than just our campus. So I don't know if that's a long answer to, I think we're a really good site, and there's advantage just because you choose to build there. Beyond that, I don't think we're doing anything that's above just providing a lease value.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Councillor Findura.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, I can't say good morning. Good afternoon. The question caught my attention. Councillor Hawkins, I'm not sure who asked about, or Mr. Standishuk asked about environmental footprint or being environmental steward as you're building out. Question is, the 6 rings that we have there, it's not related to this, but 6 rings we have, do we do already heat capture recovery and putting it into another space? Mr. Chair?
Yeah, through the chair, we don't, actually. We do not. And so, I'm going to come back to a comment that Councillor Hawkins had, and I think this is actually why site planning as well as big site planning becomes important. In many jurisdictions that have complex endeavors, you pair your aquatic center with your arenas because you scrub the heat off your arenas and you dump it in to heat your pools. And there is a cost recovery element to it that becomes quite efficient. Now, we have not done it. It wasn't the standard by which we built when the cooperators was built, but there is opportunity there. So, no, we don't do it. There is an opportunity to scrub that heat, particularly when we look to upgrade the plant, which we will need to in the next decade, to use that heat for better purpose than we have today.
Okay, thank you. So The question would be that then, as you're moving forward with the build-out, that's one of the top things that you're thinking about going and talking about 2050. Am I correct?
100%. There's really probably two in our immediate range that we want to think about is, well, three, better use of power generation as well as power use amenities. You're seeing some of that with replacement of lights. Second one is how do we move air in large buildings differently? So there's some paneling that you could put on the outside of buildings that create incredible efficiency simply by just using solar temp to heat air and move it in buildings like ours. And then the last one would be just how do we reuse energy? We're not very good at it right now. There's opportunity there for sure. So all three of those would be our priorities.
Okay, Mr. Chair, this is a great roadmap to self-sustainability, going the way you're going. So could you give me a little bit more? Would that be correct to say it's the time before to now? This is the way to go if you really want to be sustainable and help the tax base as the citizens, right? This is the largest property that we have as Regina.
Yeah.
Am I correct in that sense?
It's a great question, and through the chair, 100%. When we talk about this being a win-win-win, genuinely, there's a private business. I don't use YQR. There's a private business that wins. The city taxpayer earns $150,000 in new tax that you can do whatever you want with it, and the city taxpayer saves $650,000 at real. I don't want to minimize that. That's $1 million a year swing that we've never had before at a city that doesn't have endless pockets and a company that might make $500,000 in profit a year if we're lucky. So to your point, yes, this is a different way of thinking. But even if we move all the levers that we have, we increase beer prices and popcorn prices and charge more for hockey rentals, we just can't be sustainable without doing this. And so to your point, I think being better at every aspect of our business and adding commercial development allows us to be sustainable, really. But ultimately, there's ancillary benefit in terms of what it produces economically, what it generates in tax opportunity for you, what it generates in employment in a part of the city that frankly could use some employment. There's lots of other goods around this. So to your point, yes, we become more sustainable, but so do you as a city. And I think North Central becomes a better place to live and work and call home.
And then one more question then, Mr. Chair. Then you become, I think a few of the comments made that you're a fairly large employer in the area. Is that going to continue with, you're talking about part-time, with increasing more of the full-time jobs? So that's no change in that aspect, that drive of using the area, the individual and the residents in close to proximity to use the workforce to...
Definitely. And through the chair, I actually think that's one of the shifts that we've seen through COVID is we might be better off to hire an astronaut than a dishwasher right now. It is very difficult to staff our industry, and I'm sure you're hearing that from many others, and somewhat being coy, it's challenging. So we've actually started to shift our model to many more full-time employees because we need them to come to work. And so, one of the advantages coming out of this is I think we will have more full-time employment than we've ever had. I think we'll continue to grow our business, but you're right. Every time a McDonald's opens, it's 50 employees, and a YQR, it's 130. And so if we can add 1,000 jobs to that part of the community, you're right. That changes the way a community lives and the amount of money that's in it, and I think it becomes fairly valuable. So, definitely, I think employment grows coming out of this, not only for us as a business, but also for third-party operators that are bringing new jobs to our site.
So, Mr. Reid, thank you very much for your administration and board to have the vision. And I do believe, the first time I met you, I knew this is going to come to fruition. So thank you for sticking with us.
You had more faith than I did at that time.
Right on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Frindera. Councillor Shaw?
And from some questions that were asked, kind of a statement, but kind of a question. Vision, huge. I'm excited about this. It's a vision that I don't feel our city has had, and I'm excited about that. My question to you from councillors' questions as to this may take away business from the downtown or the warehouse or whatever, can you maybe give us some of the knowledge that you have in talking with all of those districts as to maybe how this vision that we're seeing at Real is going to transform into downtown's vision and the warehouse's vision, and how people are going to start all getting excited about this kind of progress in our city through the chair.
Yeah, through the chair, I want to be sensitive because I have a wonderful personal relationship with those that lead those districts and professional as well. And I think, through this endeavor, I think what we've seen is Real comes forward, we put very crisp, very focused plans together, and everybody gets a little bit nervous and anxious that it's going to take away from them. And I think the opportunity in it is our city will be successful because we have multiple distinct segments of our city. We can't have 10 arena districts or 10 Real districts. We need warehouse districts and, culture districts and arts districts, and great cities have those things. I think what this may afford us an opportunity to do is to build plans to this standard in each one of those districts or hold ourselves accountable to that clarity. And, for me, I think it would be great to look down the road and say this is where the warehouse is going to be in 50 years, and this is what downtown is going to be, and this is what Taylor Field is going to land on. And I know that your administration is working towards that. So I think this may give us an opportunity to give an example of where we want to get, and then hold us accountable to achieving it. So I think there has been a shift where, 2 years ago, I think a lot of people were afraid that we're going to take over the world and steal all their business. I'm not sure that they feel that way right now. I'm optimistic that they feel that if they bring themselves to those standards, then we can all have great success that makes us a better place to call home. So, yeah, I think if this is the expectation that you have, hopefully others will follow it, and, we can collectively build some pretty great spaces to call home.
Thank you, and that's exactly what it is. The expectation is being raised, and that meets everybody else. So thank you very much for this. That's all I have.
Councillor LeBlanc.
Thank you. Yeah, I wonder if you can just tell me a little bit more about your vision for the soccer pitch, and just some insight into the basis for my question is 1,650 seats seems like a lot for a soccer game in Regina. So just some insight into what you envision for that.
Yeah, for sure. And through the chair, I think it's really a couple phases. The Cooperator Center, or the Affinity Plex, was built as a bit of a mixed-use, indoor-outdoor. It was for Canada Games. And it's a great facility with no spectator seating, which limits our ability to host any event. So phase one is to put a long-term deal in place with FC Regina, which we've done, and then focus on the development of some indoor seating so that we can actually host competitive soccer year-round with a base minimum. The next phase to it is how do we put an outdoor synthetic field adjacent to it. So phase two of that is really just a bare field, some benches, some soccer pitches. The reason that 1,650 is the base math is because that builds to a Canada Games standard. And so at a national hosting level for soccer in Western Canada, and to be honest, with Canada going for gold and FIFA 2026 just around the corner, I don't think we should minimize the opportunity that we have in Regina to build soccer. And when we talk about risk around, a large stadium, if you look where MLS soccer has gone versus CFL football in the last decade, there is an equal opportunity to do great things in soccer as we've seen in this city with football. 1,650 allows you to host everything that you need to at a national or a Western Canadian standard. And then ultimately the next phase beyond that, we think, is to find a private investor that wants to build out the seating and the infrastructure to get to about 5,000 seats, which is what you need to host CPL. And so we see somewhere, and actually I'm quite optimistic that we'll have an announcement about professional soccer shortly, but we do see private investment going in to build that out. But 1,650 allows you to hit a Canada Games standard, which is what we need to host at a provincial level of competition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see no more questions. Thank you for the presentation. I guess we'll move on through the meeting. We'll now consider from EX 21-55, Real Campus Lease. Can I now ask someone from administration to speak to the report?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's hard to follow the best salesman, but at the end of the day, this really is about collaboration amongst Real and the city. So even the conversations to review terms, develop terms, involve myself, involve Mr. Lacey, Ms. Harlock, legal counsel through Mr. Weary and his staff, and of course Tim and his team. So there's been lots of conversation in terms of exploring a long-term lease opportunity that, you know, as Mr. Reid has highlighted, allows them to really achieve their vision. And, you know, as we look, we've had leases in place with Real for over 75 years. The longest lease we had was 25 years. The shortest lease we had was 4 years. At the end of the day, I think Real as an organization, through their board and through Mr. Reid and his staff team, have a vision. And I think, you know, the reason that we are recommending to council that we go to a 40-year lease term with 2 20-year extensions is so that they can really, first of all, demonstrate the city has confidence in who they are and that we have trust that they will steward those lands on our behalf. And they get to demonstrate then to, you know, interested investors that the city is in and has full support. And then, of course, it allows them to attract the type of lease arrangements that they put in front of you today. Obviously, we want to make sure that Evraz 2.0, the Real 2.0, can be realized. So this lease agreement, you know, it's based on what was in place in 2015, but it goes beyond that. And it talks about the use of the existing facilities that were constructed by Real and or the city with public funding, and to make sure that those purposes are a fit with recreation, sport, culture, and trade events. And then, of course, the private development that you've seen now for a number of years. So it's about that longer-term commitment that I've mentioned, and it's about really them being able to achieve that commercial piece, but also their master site development. And of course, that will come. A number of you have talked about that. Within the 90 days, you'll see the master site plan and you'll see the development guidelines and standards. So, you know, at the end of the day, there were some questions about, you know, what happens in the next 90 days before that shows up. I mean, Mr. Reid, I don't believe is going to bring a plan that's much different than what he's laid out to you today. The other piece, I think, just to provide some assurance to council is that, you know, there's an opportunity for administration and Real to meet on an annual basis to review performance. Are there any amendments that we need to make? And if we need to make amendments, obviously then we will bring those to council. The other piece, there's language in the agreement that says every 4 years, as a new council is put in place, if we want to make some adjustments or amendments, then we should be doing that within 12 months of a council starting its term. So although it's a long-term lease, definitely there is opportunities to have those ongoing conversations on an annual basis. And Mr. Reid, you know, highlighted that at the end of the day, council does have the ability to release the current board and put a new board in place if it was going a bit sideways. I would say we won't get to that place, because whether I'm in this chair, whether Mr. Reid is the CEO, or whether, you know, we've both moved on, there is a strong lease agreement and there are strong relationships that will allow the conversations to work in an effective manner to, first of all, continue to steward those lands and achieve the vision that they have put in place. So that, you know, the question was asked about risk. So, you know, honestly, I think the same bar of ice cream was sold 10 times here today. He's very good at that. But, you know, as administration, that's our job, is to make sure that we are, in our discussions, asking some of those challenging questions. And it's, you know, I mean, the question came up about a seniors facility on the grounds. Was that really an appropriate fit? At the end of the day, you know, it might have been infrastructure challenges that, you know, explored an alternate location, but those are the kind of things that the administration will represent. You know, Mr. Reid talked about the importance of, you know, the 100% renewable by 2050. You know, that's work that we're doing as well in terms of our energy and sustainability framework. And as we bring that forward, we'll, as a city, look to put some standards in place. We might update zoning bylaws, et cetera, to really put some definition around what a developer, whether that's through a project that's on the real grounds or whether it's a project that is going to happen in the Yards neighborhood. So Excited to be in front of you today because I think this really does set a vision and a direction long-term, and it changes the conversation. Mr. Reid highlighted, we're not talking about what's going to happen 3 years from now, 5 years from now. It's what's going to happen in this community 10 years now, or 10 years from now and 20 years from now. So we're recommending that you approve the conditions in the proposed lease and that the authority be delegated to myself to finalize the terms of the agreement, and ultimately that'll come back to council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holden. Can I get a mover for the report? Councillor Bresciani, and you're first up, so any questions or comments?
Thank you. I'll just make my comments. I think I've asked all the questions that I need to ask. I think the big thing here is that we really don't have a choice. I think that they've done a great job already just with the time, the 3 years that Mr. Reid and his team have been there, to see the changes. And when I go to the facility, the feeling is different. And that feeling, and that is almost, it's starting to connect people. One was just the pickleball community that now goes there daily. When these other amenities open up and there's others, the football, the other things start to open, we're going to see more and more people on this campus, and that's going to ignite more of that vibrancy that we want in this piece. But the second piece that I think is really important, we talked about it on previous council, is the aging infrastructure. The infrastructure that's there is not being used, and it's usable, but no one's using it. But then also we have this aging infrastructure that needs to be replaced. This is the perfect match for that. We've got investment dollars looking at commercial to get in there to create revenue for the city, which again is a win-win. That land has sat there vacant for years with no income. And I remember the conversation from council. The question was, why are we not making any more money off this site? And why, as a taxpayer, from the taxpayers, why do we have to continue to put millions of dollars back into this organization every year if it's a lost revenue? This is going to change this by having these businesses, and not just the business, but the vision. The last piece that I think is very important, as Mr. Holden and I will agree with, is the short-term and the long-term vision. A 40-year lease does not seem that long, really. When you're in the development community, it really isn't. There's maybe options, but I would say that you can plan. You can plan short-term and you can plan long-term. But I would just ask is, how will council be, communicated with? Is it going to be on a yearly basis, or how does that happen? I know in previous, we've had some conversation with communication. What is the plan for kind of a communication plan coming back to council on just updates on this to the chair?
So through you, Mr. Chair, REAL is a municipal corporation of the City of Regina. So through the unanimous members agreement that we have in place, obviously they present to council on an annual basis. They bring a budget ask on an annual basis. Even if that budget ask disappears, there will still be opportunities for Mr. Reid and his team to come before council and give updates on an annual basis in terms of their performance, their plans, their strategies. And, the one thing that we do know, even a 40-year vision, it will change over time. So if there are changes that they need to make, either to the site master plan or to some of their standards, then those come back to council. So there will be regular opportunities for Mr. Reid and his team at administration to update council on progress, on challenges, on any adjustments that we need to make to leases, et cetera. So at least on an annual basis. And, I know that the board and Mr. Reid take a regular opportunity just to engage with council to make sure that you are kept apprised of the activities of REAL and the success and the direction that they're achieving.
Great. Thank you. And my last comment, I do want to say thank you to administration. This has been a long time, I know, in the works when we talked about the infrastructure, as well as to the team at REAL for them thinking outside the box. And when I use that terms, I think of the ice spill that happened this year, which was imperative. People loved it. And then the last one, which was incredibly across Canada, I think we were the first one to have a drive-through for COVID, to get the COVID, which again was another way to think outside the box, but also to have that as a place where the community could go and get their COVID shot. And the way it was organized, when you went into the line, it was unbelievable. We got to see the back of the buildings, which I'd never seen before. But again, another way to use it for our community too. So again, I think we are on our way forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bresciani. Up next, we have Councillor Fundura.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. Again, I would like to make a comment to the administration, city administration, to work very closely with Riel to achieve the common long-term goal. 40, 80 years, it's short. I just remember 40 years ago, it is here already, so it goes quick. And I want to say thank you to Riel Board and Mr. Reid and your staff and administration to drive this. We need the facilities to enhance our let's say profile, and to bring events here. If you don't have it, no one will come here. And so this has been the thing for years, where everything wound up going elsewhere. So I'm going to give you one example, and thank you, Mr. LeBlanc, who mentioned about soccer. I don't want to be the only one that talked about soccer. But it was always the thing, is that events that should have been here went elsewhere. And so our young had no places to practice their trade. So building something like a soccer facilities, Councilor Bresciani mentioned about the pickleball, volleyball, we're using what we've got. And I don't think it's wrong for us to make money from the facility, the largest grounds that we had for a long time. I don't think it's illegal for us to say, it'd be nice for us to say that to taxpayers. We are good stewards of our asset. And we always talked about, we had the reserves and had it about asset management. It's important to have that. And we have a great leadership at the Riel to give us that. And I have 100%, 150% more than that, a trust in, as Mr. Holden mentioned, that is the right direction to go. It's a common sense approach. We cannot be second-guessing ourselves. This is a huge hub, the property of Regina, State of Regina, it's taxpayers. The other hubs will follow. And so the comment we made, if you want to keep up, you follow. And you look at other cities, the 2.0, we had about other cities, how they utilize that piece of property, their piece of property. That's it's footstep away from downtown. I'm excited. I am totally in favor of this. We need to have that mindset, that we need to trust the people around us to deliver the product that we are proud of, and our citizens, our young, are unborn yet, that have places to go, and that's what's necessary. Keep them away from the corners or getting into trouble. Give them places to do their art or do their stuff. And that's important. So my comment is, let's go. Let's get this thing done, because for the years, everyone has talked about, you remember playing soccer in the old curling ring. So, but anyways, I digress. But anyhow, I'm excited with this. This is very important for our city to grow. One of the major hubs that we need to secure. So thank you again for that, and I'm all in favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fundura. Councillor Zakidniak.
Okay, so I'm also in favor of this and happy to support it. I do want to clarify through administration. It sounds like the site master plan is going to be developed within the next 90 days, and it sounds like administration is planning to wait for the development of the sustainability framework to guide the sustainability guidelines for the campus at Riel. Is that accurate? That's what I thought I heard in your response through the chair.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think as we look at the future of sustainability and net zero developments. We talked about that when we brought the Yards neighborhood plan forward. We haven't defined exactly what that means yet. So that's part of bringing forward the sustainability framework. Will provide some guidance that we then need to take as an administration and look at how does that fit and complement with some of our zoning bylaw, our design guidelines. When it's private development and private investment, obviously we need to set the parameters of what we expect. And we also need to make sure that there's some affordability consideration in that. So we're just not there yet. But as we hit the end of the year and that framework comes forward, then I think we are positioned to start to define for the community what sustainable development looks like and what type of requirements the city will ask for. So whether it's, solar panels and heat, opportunities in terms of recirculation, et cetera. We just built Maple Leaf Pool and we looked for many opportunities to leverage, green initiatives in our design and in our operations. But as a city, we're not there yet. So it would be unfair to actually require anything different today of real and potential developers than we would anybody else. Having said that, you heard from Mr. Reid that there's really an opportunity for the city to set through lead example, whether it's development at Real or whether it's tied to future development in the Yards. We can be the example to show the rest of the community what development opportunities may look like and what you can realize and generate by making what will be some additional investment for some long-term savings.
Okay. So I understand that. I am concerned, though, that so we have the draft framework coming forward in December, and then that will need to either be finalized or some changes made, and then that will not be, that document is an overarching document, so then we'd need to drill down to consider how that could be operationalized at Real. Real has told us that they would like to be sustainability, like a leader in that, a showcase site for that. I'm concerned about the time that it'll take for us to develop these things and the building that might occur and development on site while we are waiting to have our plan fully sorted out. So my question, so I guess to respond to those concerns, and what do we do in the meantime while we're still developing this? Like there's, because there is, I think, the real possibility that that developments will happen while we're still trying to get our plan together, and we'll miss the opportunity to require LEED certification, for instance. Like you can't go back and do that once you've already built something.
So I'll start, and then I may have Ms. Folk just provide a little bit of additional context around the work on the framework and the next steps as that gets brought forward to council. Currently, when we build new facilities as a city, we build to a LEED standard. We don't pursue LEED certification because it's fairly expensive. I know Mr. Reid is committed to where it's a facility that's being on city property, that we're looking to pursue that. So there's not a great answer to your question. Because although McDonald's is ready to open up heading into September, and the YQR distillery may be in the ground, you can't reverse and have those construction projects, I guess, change what they built. In the same breath, that organizations like McDonald's, those large corporations, are always looking to demonstrate that they are good community citizens and that they're being as green as they can be. So it's going to take us a little bit of time. The conversations can always occur between the development process and the permitting process between Real and the city, or any developer, to try and push and advance that. But until we actually have it in a bylaw and it's a requirement, it just creates a bit of uncertainty, and it actually creates a lack of competitive advantage in terms of trying to secure investment if we're requiring a construction firm, a developer, to far exceed what the standard is in a community. And then we might actually see that investment does go elsewhere, away from real, where actually we want to create the district, that whole campus experience. Ms. Folk, anything extra to add?
Through you, thank you for the question. I think the other piece that I'd like to add, when that framework does come forward, it will be coming forward with three scenarios with different action plans. And I think from a community and organizational perspective, we really need to be thoughtful in terms of what we action and some of the sequencing around that. So for example, there have been a couple of reports in front of you, including one focusing on idling. Yesterday, if you happened to watch CTV, you saw a piece related to the landfill gas to energy plan and the capture there and the impact when it comes to offsetting carbon dioxide. And we need all of that data and information that's currently being collected by the consultants and throughout the community, and they're making great efforts on that. So I think the policy conversation towards the end of this year and as we go into 2020 is going to be instrumental in terms of determining what actions, what level of investment, and where we can have the most significant impact. Also do want to take us back that we were looking at that climate change and mitigation through a three-pronged approach, and I heard Mr. Reid and his team speak about that today, with the first prong being really focused on reducing energy consumption. And I know over at the campus they're doing some really great work right now in terms of assessing and have technology in place that's looking at their energy efficiency. Also how we improve energy usage and efficiency, and then again that third prong is really switching to renewable and low carbon energy sources. So I think this is a great conversation and great input to some very fulsome policy conversations as we get to the end of this year and into next year, so we can start making some very wise investments from a community perspective that's going to get us to 2050 in a very planful way.
Okay. So thank you for those answers. I think what I would suggest then in the development of the site master plan, that the desire to have that campus be a showcase of sustainability is that is outlined in that plan, and that while we are waiting for a more detailed framework of what we're going to do in the bylaws and all of that, that the plan notes that any ways that tenants can contribute to environmental sustainability, to this showcase site, that this is highly encouraged. Something like that. I understand that, you know, having very specific requirements before we have them as the city, I understand how that could be problematic. But so what I'd like to suggest is that we include that language in the master plan, and that we are encouraging those who are considering developing there to consider that in their development plans. Is that something that would be an appropriate thing for us to do while we wait for this framework?
Yes, I think, not to put words in Mr. Reid's mouth, but I think he's made that commitment, and we can make sure that there's that kind of language in a document when it comes to council.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Skidniak. Next up, Councillor Stadenchuk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to just jump right to the appendix, because I have a question regarding one point under the commercial development strategy. So it's on the page 3 of 3. The second last bullet under commercial development strategy. So it talks about tenant selection policies and practices. So I wonder if you could just explain a little bit about that. The Provincial Capital Commission does have a policy around tenants that in the park have to fit the 5 pillars of the park. So I'm trying to understand what kind of criteria or what would be involved in tenant selection here, because I think there's an opportunity to, you know, if we're not going to be having, and I don't think as a council we want to have day-to-day operation of what happens on the campus, but if we know what the policies are in general, then we know that the development of who goes on the campus fits into these policies and practices. So I wonder if you can expand on that a bit.
So through you, Mr. Chair, obviously as we discussed the terms of the lease agreement, these were two pieces that we knew, council had concern over, and it was, how do we assure that there is, fair and equal opportunity for, local to be considered as a part of proposals. So, Mr. Reid indicated when they actually hired Colliers, for example, in that instance, they went through a competitive procurement process, very similar to what the city would do through our procurement practices. They've been very open and transparent in terms of saying, hey, we're open for business, and we've got X acres in terms of commercial development opportunity, and people have approached Colliers, and that's how the projects have come forward. You have a vision in front of you today. It talks about restaurants. It talks about commercial retail units. They are looking to make sure that there is local, in terms of even the McDonald's is a local Regina family who will be owning and operating that. The YQR distillery is another example of a local individual who's Regina-based, and so those are the conversations we've had. I'm not sure yet that Real has created those policies and put those in place yet, but that's the intention. And then, of course, the other is, around, again, the pieces around energy and sustainability. They're working on that as well. So it'll be their responsibility to create those and make sure those that are put in place. That is a requirement of the lease, so that's something that we can ask of Mr. Reid and his team in terms of, what are those policies, and, I think that's an opportunity at an update when Real comes in front of council to say this is where we landed. But I think they're demonstrating already their commitment to making sure that they are open, there's transparency, and that there is competition, and the types of businesses that they are securing are consistent with the mandate that they have to provide sport, rec, culture, convention space.
Okay, thank you. I support this, and I'm not going to give a speech, just saying that I support that we move forward on this and create a viable Real campus, and that's all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanchuk. I see no other speakers to this, so I guess I'll just throw in my own comments. I do support this. The 40-year lease is a good idea. Trying to do business to sell lease space to people for multi-year leases with only a two-year lease control on property yourself is like trying to sell a bridge. So I support this. I think it's wise and common sense. With that, I'll ask the clerk to call the vote.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll call on Councillor Bresciani, please, first.
In favor.
Councillor Stevens.
In favor.
Councillor Hawkins.
In favor.
Councillor Stadnicek.
In favor.
Councillor LeBlanc.
In favor.
Councillor Shaw.
In favor.
Councillor Findura.
In favor.
Councillor Mancinelli.
In favor.
Carries, I don't think I forgot anybody, carries 9-0, Deputy Mayor. 8-0, I'm sorry.
8, yeah.
That's right, 8-0.
Oh, she's here.
Can't vote.
Thank you. We will now consider item EX 21-56, Riel YQR Distillery Limited lease. Can I have a mover for this? Councillor Stevens. Any comments from the administration? Mr. Lacey.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So Riel is requesting consent to enter into a sublease with YQR Distillery Limited for the portion of the campus known as the Exhibition Building. This item is being brought forward concurrently with the discussion we just had with respect to the campus lease renewal. The proposed lease is in alignment with the approved Riel 2.0 strategic plan that Council has approved previously, and the revenue from this lease will assist in helping offset operational costs of Riel and fulfilling its long-term obligations with respect to repair, maintenance, and capital renewal on the campus. as this sublease in total, when you look at the renewal years as well, could go as long as 80 years. It does exceed the current term of the current campus lease that we had just talked about if it gets approved at council next week, which is 40 years, and as a result, it does require approval of council, and as a result, the report's before you seeking approval to enter into that lease, Riel to enter into that lease. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lacey. I see no questions. Councillor Stevens? Councillor Stevens already moved it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Any comments, Councillor Stevens, or should we move to the...
No.
Mr. Clerk?
Thank you. I'll begin with Councillor Stevens then, please.
In favor.
Councillor Zahidniak.
In favor.
Councillor Shaw.
In favor.
Councillor LeBlanc.
In favor.
Councillor Findura.
In favor.
Councillor Bresciani.
In favor.
Councillor Hawkins.
In favor.
Councillor Stadnichuk.
In favor.
Councillor Mancinelli.
In favor.
Carries 9-0, Deputy Mayor.
And last up, with regards to this, we will now consider EX 21-57, Riel Borrowing Bylaw Amendment. Any comments from the administration on this report?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So, council might remember a number of conversations we had through the past year about the impact COVID and the pandemic has had on Riel's operation, with the reality that Riel's operations really are about holding events and large-scale events, and COVID had a significant impact on their ability to do so. And so through the past year, council did approve a number of steps to support Riel through their working capital or cash flow challenges due to due to the pandemic. In April of 2020, council did approve a change to Riel's credit facilities within their existing $13 million borrowing approval, which increased the overall draw that they could have on their credit facilities. And then in December of 2020, council also increased their total credit available to Riel by $8 million. Once again, to provide the ability for them to manage their cash flow through COVID and through the recovery period. To date, Riel has not needed to access that $8 million. And this is due primarily to the fact that they've had the opportunity subsequent to that December approval to receive Canada Emergency Wage Supplement funding of $4.1 million to date, and they're anticipating a further $2 million in 2021. Riel is continuing and will continue to experience cash flow challenges over the next year or so as we move through and recover from the pandemic. And it's estimated that they overall would still continue to be in a negative cash flow position of $7.5 million by the end of 2022. As a result, administration is still recommending that the $8 million be authorized for borrowing and for Riel to draw upon it only as needed should their cash flow circumstances require it. The original bylaw, we've had further discussions. Riel and the city have had further discussions with the Riel's lender, and as a result of those discussions and how that financial instrument would be structured, it needs to align with council's bylaw that council's approved, and as a result of recent discussions with the lender, we are seeking an updating of the bylaw to match that financial instrument. And part of it is Riel has been able to obtain slightly lower interest rates as part of that financial instruments. Secondly, we are asking for some amendments to the bylaw as it relates to the current bylaw around Riel's credit card program. Riel has been in discussions with their financial institution, and they are looking at implementing a corporate credit card program that's slightly different in the current bylaw that will provide them more flexibility and control, and overall, I believe, be an overall benefit to Riel. So as a result, we're seeking council authority to basically enter and complete the execution of those agreements with Riel's lender, HSBC, Bank of Canada, and that the city solicitor make necessary changes to the current bylaw to bring that into alignment with what has been negotiated with their lender and any agreements that would be entered into with the lender.
Thank you, Mr. Lacey. I see Councillor Hawkins offered to move this report. Do you have any questions, Councillor Hawkins? Sorry.
I have no questions, and I just very briefly say this is largely in the measure of housekeeping. The pandemic is not yet over, and I think this is prudent support to give to Riel as they work their way through it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hawkins. No other comments or questions? I guess I'll call the vote.
Thank you. I'll begin with Councillor Hawkins, please.
In favor.
Councillor Stavnichuk.
In favor.
Councillor Stevens.
In favor.
Councillor Bresciani.
In favor.
Councillor Findura.
In favor.
Councillor LeBlanc.
In favor.
Councillor Shaw.
In favor.
Councillor Zahidniak.
In favor.
Councillor Mancinelli.
In favor.
Carries 9-0. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. And I guess from there, I need a resolution to move on to private session. Councillor Bresciani. And maybe we'll take a break for 20 minutes and have a small lunch break as well, if that's okay. Looks like it's in order. We're good to go. Back at 10 after 12, or 10 after 1, sorry.